In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets hide behind lace curtains, a single glance from Miss Jane Marple's faded blue eyes shatters a killer's perfect mask. At a charity tea, a charming newcomer's smile falters under her gaze but why? What dark truth lurks behind the polished facade of this stranger? And can Miss Marple unravel a murder before the clock strikes tea time again? Chapter 1. The arrival at St. Mary Mead. The train rattled gently along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the patchwork of green fields flashing past the window. Miss Jane Marple sat by the glass, her hands folded neatly over a worn leather satchel, her eyes tracing the hedgerows that stitched the countryside together. She was no stranger to St. Mary Mead, that quaint village nestled in the heart of England, but this journey felt different. There was a prickle of anticipation in her chest, a faint hum of instinct that told her this summer retreat would be anything but restful. At 72, Miss Marple was a study in understated elegance, her silver hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, her tweed coat crisp despite the journey's dust, her eyes bright and sharp as a sparrow's, missed nothing, not the nervous fidgeting of the young man in the opposite seat, nor the way the conductor lingered a touch too long when checking her ticket. She smiled faintly, a private amusement, at the world's habit of revealing itself to those who knew how to look. Her invitation to St. Mary Mead had come from Lady Beatrice Harrow, an old school friend whose letters had grown increasingly cryptic over the years. Beatrice's latest missive, penned in her looping, aristocratic hand, had been particularly intriguing. "Come, Jane, for the air and the company. A gala at Harrow Manor will be splendid, but I fear there are shadows stirring. Your keen eye would do us good." Shadows, indeed. Beatrice was not one for melodrama, which made the word choice all the more compelling. Miss Marple had packed her bags at once. As the train slowed, the platform of St. Mary Mead came into view, a quaint affair framed by blooming hollyhocks and a single bench where an elderly porter dozed. Miss Marple gathered her things, her movements deliberate but spry, and stepped onto the platform. The air was warm, scented with cut grass and the faint tang of coal smoke. She adjusted her hat and scanned the crowd, such as it was. A handful. Of villagers milled about, a baker with flour-dusted trousers, a postmistress clutching a bundle of letters, and a young girl chasing a runaway hoop. Miss Marple. A voice cut through the hum of village life, warm and commanding. Lady Beatrice Harrow strode forward, her silver cane tapping the ground with authority. She was a tall woman, her auburn hair streaked with gray but still vibrant, her emerald green dress a bold contrast to the village's muted tones. At 65, Beatrice carried herself with the poise of a woman who had navigated both ballrooms and boardrooms with equal ease. "Beatrice, my dear," Miss Marple said, her smile genuine as they clasped hands, "you look as splendid as ever. And you, Jane, haven't aged a day since our schoolroom mischief," Beatrice replied, though her eyes held a flicker of something less jovial concern, perhaps, or caution. "Come, the car's waiting. We've much to catch up on." The car, a gleaming Rolls-Royce that seemed almost too grand for the village's narrow lanes, whisked them toward Harrow Manor. Miss Marple noted the driver, a wiry man with a scar above his left eyebrow, who kept his eyes fixed on the road but stole glances at Beatrice in the rearview mirror. Curious, she thought, filing the observation away. Harrow Manor loomed at the end of a winding drive, its honey-colored stone glowing in the late afternoon sun. Ivy clung to its walls, softening the severity of its Georgian architecture, and the grounds were a riot of roses and neatly trimmed yews. But as they approached, Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. The windows, though polished, seemed to watch her back, and the front door, flanked by 2 stone lions, stood slightly ajar, as if hesitant to welcome her dot inside. The manor was a symphony of old wealth, polished oak floors, crystal chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced Harrows glaring from the walls. Beatrice led Miss Marple to a drawing-room where a fire crackled despite the summer warmth. A tea tray awaited, its silver gleaming, but what caught Miss Marple's attention was the butler, a gaunt man with deep-set eyes and a deferential bow that didn't quite mask his unease. "Miss Marple, this is Mr. Grayson, our butler," Beatrice said, settling into a velvet armchair. "He's been with us for years. Haven't you, Grayson?" "Indeed, my lady," Grayson replied, his voice low and measured. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Marple." His gaze lingered on her for a moment too long, and she caught a shadow in his expression, something between wariness and calculation. "Tea, Grayson, if you please," Beatrice said, waving a hand. As he retreated, she leaned closer to Miss Marple. "He's indispensable, but lately I've wondered if he hears more than he lets on. The manor has been unsettled." Miss Marple sipped her tea, the delicate porcelain warm in her hands. "Unsettled how, Beatrice?" Beatrice hesitated, her fingers tightening on her cane. "It's the gala, I suppose. Everyone's on edge. The Harrow diamond is to be displayed, a family heirloom, you know. There's talk of a curse, silly village nonsense, but it's stirred up old grudges. And then there's Clarence Vale, that charming rogue. He's been asking odd questions about the diamond." "Clarence Vale?" Miss Marple's tone was light, but her mind was already turning. "A guest, a distant cousin, of sorts. Handsome, dreadfully clever, but I don't trust him. Nor do I entirely trust Sylvia Dunworth, the heiress who's been circling Edmund, my nephew. They're all here for the gala, along with a dozen others, and I can't shake the feeling that something's brewing." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the window where the garden stretched toward a copse of oaks. A figure moved there, a man in a dark coat, too far to identify, but moving with purpose toward the manor's east wing. "And the diamond," she said softly. "Where is it kept?" "In a safe in the east wing. Only I and Grayson know its location. But Jane, I swear, sometimes I feel it's watching me, waiting to cause trouble." Beatrice laughed, but it was brittle, and Miss Marple noted the strain in her friend's face. The conversation shifted to lighter matters, village gossip, the new vicar's penchant for long sermons, but Miss Marple's attention wandered. She thought of Grayson's guarded look, the man in the garden, and Beatrice's mention of shadows. Her years of observing human nature had taught her that shadows often hid secrets, and secrets, in a place like Harrow Manor, could be dangerous. Dinner that evening was a formal affair, the dining-room aglow with candlelight. Miss Marple, seated between Beatrice and a jovial colonel named Fitzroy, took stock of the guests. Clarence Vale was indeed handsome, with dark curls and a smile that disarmed too quickly. He spoke of London's art scene with practised ease, but his eyes flicked to the chandelier, as if calculating its worth. Sylvia Dunworth, a willowy woman with sharp cheekbones, and the emerald necklace that rivaled Beatrice's, sat opposite, her laughter bright, but her gaze cold when it rested on Edmund Harrow, a brooding young man with his aunt's auburn hair, but none of her warmth. The colonel regaled Miss Marple with tales of his regiment, but she listened with half an ear, watching Clarence. He toyed with his wine-glass, his fingers restless, and when a footman dropped a spoon, he flinched, a small movement, but telling. Sylvia, meanwhile, excused herself midway through the meal, claiming a headache, though Miss Marple noted her quick glance at Edmund before she left Dot as dessert was served poached. Pears and a delicate syrup Grayson approached Beatrice, bending to whisper in her ear. Her face tightened, and she excused herself, leaving Miss Marple to observe the table alone. The colonel was now deep in conversation with the dowager about rose pruning, and Clarence had slipped into a quiet exchange with a nervous-looking woman in spectacles, whom Miss Marple recognized as the village librarian, Miss Pym. "Miss Marple, you're awfully quiet," Clarence said suddenly, turning his charm on her. "Not overwhelmed by our little gathering, I hope?" "Not at all, Mr. Vale," she replied, her voice mild. "I find it quite illuminating. So many interesting people in one room." He laughed, but there was an edge to it. "You've a sharp eye, I'll bet. Not much gets past you." "Oh, I'm just an old spinster who likes to watch the world go by," she said, her smile disarming. But her eyes held his for a moment, and she saw it a flicker of unease, quickly masked. Interesting, she thought. Beatrice returned, her expression composed but her hands restless. "A minor matter," she said to Miss Marple's unspoken question. "Grayson's just overly cautious about the silver." The evening wound down, and Miss Marple retired to her room, a cozy chamber with a view of the east wing. As she unpinned her hat, she replayed the day's observations: Grayson's wariness, Clarence's nerves, Sylvia's tension, and Beatrice's cryptic hints. The Harrow diamond with its whispered curse was the thread tying them together, but there was something else, something deeper. A shadow, as Beatrice had said. Standing by the window, she caught a glimpse of movement below, a figure slipping into the east wing's shadows. Not the same man from the garden, she thought, for this one moved with a lighter step. She made a mental note to explore the wing tomorrow, perhaps under the guise of admiring the Manor's architecture. Dot, as she slipped into bed, the Manor settling into silence around her, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but they were there, waiting for her to pick them up. She had come to St. Mary Mead for a rest, but rest, it seemed, would have to wait. The game was afoot, and she was ready to play. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Garden. The morning sun bathed Harrow Manor's gardens in a golden haze, coaxing the roses to unfurl and casting dappled shadows across the gravel paths. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in a soft lavender frock and her favorite straw hat, strolled through the grounds, ostensibly to admire the blooms, but in truth to listen. Gardens, she had long observed, were where secrets bloomed as readily as flowers, and the tea party Lady Beatrice had arranged promised to be a fertile ground for both. The lawn was a lively tableau. Guests in summer linens chatted beneath a striped marquee, their voices mingling with the clink of teacups and the hum of bees. A long table groaned under platters of scones, cucumber sandwiches, and a silver urn dispensing fragrant Darjeeling. Beatrice, resplendent in a cream silk dress, presided over the gathering with her usual grace, though Miss Marple noted the faint crease between her friend's brows, a telltale sign of strain. Miss Marple settled into a wicker chair near a hedge of lavender, her knitting bag at her feet. She drew out her needles and a skein of pale blue wool, the rhythmic click of her work a perfect cover for eavesdropping. Her eyes, bright and unobtrusive, scanned the guests. Clarence Vale, in a tailored blazer that seemed a touch too polished. For a country tea, held court near the rose arbor, his laughter drawing admiring glances from a cluster of young women. Sylvia Dunworth, her emerald necklace replaced by a simple pearl choker, sipped tea with a distracted air, her gaze drifting toward the Manor's east wind. Edmund Harrow, brooding as ever, stood apart, his hands thrust into his pockets as he stared at a distant oak. The village librarian, Miss Pym, hovered near the table, her spectacles glinting as she fussed over a plate of shortbread. Miss Marple had met her briefly at dinner the previous night, and found her a curious mix of timidity and sharp intelligence. Now Miss Pym's nervous glances toward Clarence suggested she knew something or feared something. Miss Marple's attention sharpened as she caught a snatch of conversation from two matrons seated nearby, their voices low, but not low enough. "It's the Harrow diamond, mark my words," one said, her fan fluttering. "Gone missing again. They say cursed, that thing is. Brought nothing but misery since old Lord Harrow's day." "Nonsense," the other replied, though her tone lacked conviction. "It's locked away, isn't it? Beatrice wouldn't let it out of her sight, wouldn't she?" the first matron said, leaning closer. "I heard young Clarence was asking about it, all casual-like. And that Sylvia, she's got her eye on Edmund, but I wager she's after more than his heart." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her face a mask of serene concentration. The Harrow diamond again. Beatrice had mentioned it last night, her words tinged with unease. A family heirloom rumored to be cursed. Its absence or presence seemed to stir the Manor's undercurrents. Miss Marple made a mental note to press Beatrice for details, but discreetly. Pushing too hard could close doors as quickly as it opened them. Her gaze shifted to Clarence, who had extricated himself from his admirers and was now strolling toward the marquee. His stride was confident, but Miss Marple caught the way his fingers drummed against his thigh, a nervous habit, perhaps, or a sign of impatience. He paused near Miss Pym, who flinched slightly as he addressed her. "Miss Pym, you're the village's keeper of secrets, aren't you?" Clarence said, his tone teasing, but with an edge Miss Marple didn't miss. "All those dusty tomes in the library, any tailies of cursed jewels hidden among them?" Miss Pym adjusted her spectacles, her smile tight. "Oh, Mr. Vale, you do like to jest. The library's mostly parish records and novels. Nothing so grand as a cursed diamond." "But you've heard the stories, surely?" Clarence pressed, leaning closer. The Harrow diamond, vanishing every few decades, only to turn up with a trail of misfortune. "Don't tell me you're not curious." I leave curiosity to others," Miss Pym stammered, her cheeks flushing. She excused herself, clutching her plate as if it were a shield, and hurried toward the safety of the tea-urn. Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second. Clarence's probing was too pointed to be idle chatter. He was fishing, and Miss Pym's discomfort suggested she might know more than she let on. Interesting, Miss Marple thought, resuming her knitting. Very interesting. Beatrice approached, her cane tapping lightly on the grass. "Jane, you're hiding away in the shade," she said, settling into the chair beside her. "What do you make of our little gathering?" "A charming affair," Miss Marple replied, her tone light. "Though I confess the talk of this diamond has me intrigued. The village seems quite taken with it." Beatrice's smile faltered. "Village gossip, nothing more. The diamond's safe, Jane, I assure you. But people love a scandal, and the Harrow family's provided plenty over the years." "Scandals do have a way of lingering," Miss Marple said, her eyes on her knitting. "Like shadows, don't they? Hard to shake off." Beatrice's fingers tightened on her cane, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might say more. But then Sylvia approached, her pearl choker catching the light, and the moment passed. "Lady Beatrice, your roses are divine," Sylvia said, her voice smooth as polished glass. "I was just telling Edmund he should take a cutting for his own garden, but he's far too distracted today." "Edmund's always distracted," Beatrice said with a wry smile. "But I'm glad you approve of the roses, Sylvia. You must take a tour with Jane later. She's quite the gardener herself." "Oh, I'd love that," Sylvia said, turning to Miss Marple. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were assessing, as if weighing Miss Marple's presence. "You must. Tell me your secrets, Miss Marple." "My own garden is a disgrace." "Nothing but patience and a bit of pruning," Miss Marple said, meeting Sylvia's gaze with her own mild one. "Plants, like people, reveal themselves in time." Sylvia's smile flickered, and she excused herself to join a group by the fountain. Miss Marple noted the slight stiffness in her posture, the way her hand brushed her choker as if it were a talisman. Another piece of the puzzle, she thought Dot as the afternoon wore on. The tea party grew livelier, with children chasing each other through the rose beds, and the colonel launching into a loud anecdote about a tiger hunt. Miss Marple, however, remained focused, her ears attuned to the undercurrents. She overheard a groundskeeper muttering to a maid about strange goings-on near the east wing at night, and caught a glimpse of Grayson, the butler, watching Clarence from the marquee's edge, his expression unreadable. Then, as she reached for a scone, she heard a new voice, a low, urgent whisper from behind the lavender hedge. She tilted her head, her knitting a perfect pretense, and listened. "Can't keep poking around, Clarence," the voice said, male and clipped. "You'll draw attention." "Relax, Edmund," Clarence replied, his tone smooth but strained. "I'm just making conversation. No one suspects a thing." "You're too cocky," Edmund hissed. "If Beatrice finds out—" "She won't," Clarence cut in. "Not unless someone talks, and you wouldn't, would you?" The voices faded as the two men moved away, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her hands remained steady, looping the wool with practiced ease. So Clarence and Edmund were entangled in something tied to the diamond, perhaps, or to the Manor secrets. She filed the exchange away, her mind already turning. Over possibilities. The tea party wound down as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. Beatrice rose to bid the guests farewell, her charm masking the tension Miss Marple now saw clearly. As the villagers dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the east wing. The groundskeeper's comment about nighttime activity nagged at her, as did Clarence's nervous fidgeting and Edmund's sharp words. She approached Beatrice, who was directing Grayson to clear the table. "A delightful afternoon," Miss Marple said. "But I confess I'm curious about your east wing. Such a grand old house. Might I explore it tomorrow? Beatrice hesitated, then smiled. Of course, Jane. It's mostly dusty rooms and old portraits, but you're welcome to poke about. Just mind the creaky floors. As Miss Marple returned to the manor, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The whispers in the garden had given her a thread to pull, and pull it she would. Clarence's unease, Edmund's secrecy, Sylvia's guarded glances, and the ever-present spectre of the Harrow diamond, they were all pieces of a tapestry she was beginning to weave. The gala was tomorrow night, and with it, she suspected, would come more revelations. For now she was content to let the puzzle simmer, knowing the manor's shadows would not stay hidden for long. Chapter 3. The Gala's hidden tensions. The grand hall of Harrow Manor shimmered under the glow of a dozen chandeliers, their crystals scattering light like stars across the polished marble floor. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of the room, her modest black lace dress blending into the shadows of a velvet curtain, her eyes bright and watchful. The gala was in full swing, a whirlwind of silk gowns, clinking champagne flutes, and laughter that rang just a touch too bright to be genuine. She held a glass of elderflower cordial, untouched, her attention fixed on the currents beneath the surface of this glittering affair. Lady Beatrice Harrow, resplendent in sapphire velvet, moved through the crowd with the ease of a seasoned hostess, her silver cane a regal accessory rather than a necessity. Yet Miss Marple noted the way her friend's gaze darted to the double doors leading to the east wing, as if expecting an uninvited guest. The Harrow diamond, though not on display tonight, hung over the evening like a spectre, its rumored curse fueling whispers that reached Miss Marple's ears even over the strains of a string quartet. The guest list was a tapestry of motives, each thread more tangled than the last. Clarence Vale, his dark curls gleaming under the lights, waltzed with a local heiress, his charm as polished as the floor beneath his feet. But Miss Marple caught the way his eyes flicked to the east wings. Doors, a fleeting glance that betrayed his thoughts. Sylvia Dunworth, in a gown of emerald silk that matched her sharp eyes, stood near the fireplace, her conversation with Edmund Harrow strained, their voices low and clipped. Edmund, his auburn hair mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it, seemed distracted, his gaze fixed on the crowd rather than Sylvia's words. Miss Marple sipped her cordial, her expression one of benign interest, but her mind was a whirl of observations. The tea party yesterday had given her fragments, Clarence's probing questions about the diamond, Edmund's heated whisper, Sylvia's guarded demeanor, but tonight, she sensed, those fragments would begin to form a picture. She moved toward a gilt-edged table laden with canapes, positioning herself to overhear a cluster of guests near the quartet. Bad business, that diamond, a portly man in a tweed suit muttered, his mustache quivering. Old Lord Harrow lost his fortune. After it surfaced last, you know, and now it's missing again? Hardly missing, his companion, a woman with a peacock feather fascinator, replied. Beatrice keeps it locked tight. But I heard Clarence Vale was sniffing around, asking Grayson odd questions about the manor's security. Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. Village gossip, while often exaggerated, had a knack for circling the truth. She glanced at Grayson, the butler, who glided through the crowd with a tray of champagne, his gaunt face impassive, but his eyes alert. He paused near Clarence, offering a glass, and Miss Marple noted the brief exchange, too brief, too careful, as if both men were measuring their words. The music swelled, a waltz giving way to a lively reel, and the guests surged on to the dance floor. Miss Marple retreated to a plush settee, her knitting bag at her side, though she made no move to open it. Instead, she watched Sylvia, who had broken away from Edmund and was now speaking with Miss Pym, the librarian, near a towering arrangement of Lely. Miss Pym's spectacles glinted nervously, and Sylvia's hand rested lightly on her arm, gesture that seemed more controlling than comforting. "Miss Marple, you're missing the fun." The jovial Colonel Fitzroy approached, his medals gleaming on his chest. "Care for a turn on the floor? I'm no Fred Astaire, but I can manage a step or two." "You're too kind, Colonel," Miss Marple said, her smile warm but firm. "I'm quite content to watch. The young people do it so much better." "Nonsense. You've a spry look about you," he said, settling beside her. "But I'll confess, this lot's a bit too tense for my liking. That young veiled chap, for instance, charming fellow, but he's got the look of a man with a card up his sleeve." Miss Marple tilted her head, encouraging him to go on. "Oh? You've a keen eye, Colonel. Comes from years of spotting trouble in the ranks," he said with a chuckle. "Vale's been hovering near the east wing all evening. Saw him slip out there earlier before the music started. And Sylvia, well, she's got Edmund tied in knots, hasn't she?" "Family matters can be so complicated," Miss Marple said, her tone mild, but her mind racing. Clarence in the east wing before the gala began? That was new, and it aligned with the groundskeeper's comment about nighttime activity. She made a mental note to investigate the wing herself, perhaps under the pretense of needing air. The conversation was cut short by a sudden jarring flicker of the chandeliers. The room plunged into darkness, the music faltering as gasps rippled through the crowd. Miss Marple's grip tightened on her glass, her senses sharpening. A woman's scream pierced the air, high and sharp, coming from the direction of the fireplace. The darkness lasted only seconds before the lights blazed back on, revealing flushed faces and nervous laughter. "Lasted wiring," Beatrice called out, her voice steady, but her eyes scanning the room. "Nothing to worry about, everyone. Carry on." But Miss Marple's attention was on the fireplace, where Sylvia stood, her hand clutching her throat. Her pearl choker was gone, the pale skin of her neck bare. She met Miss Marple's gaze for a fleeting moment, her expression a mix of shock and something else, anger, perhaps, or fear. Edmund hurried to her side, his face pale, while Clarence, now near the buffet, watched the scene with an intensity that belied his casual stance. Miss Marple set her glass down, her mind turning over the possibilities. A blackout, a scream, a missing necklace. It was too convenient, too staged. The pearl choker, while valuable, was hardly the Harrow diamond, but its theft in such a dramatic moment suggested a diversion. She glanced at the east wing doors, still closed, and wondered if someone had used the darkness to slip away or to slip something away. Beatrice approached, her cane tapping sharply. "Jane, are you all right? That scream gave me quite a start." "Quite. All right, Beatrice," Miss Marple said, her voice calm. "But poor Miss Dunworth seems shaken. Her necklace, I believe?" Beatrice's lips thinned. "Yes, Grayson just told me. Stolen, it seems, in that wretched blackout. I've asked him." to check the doors and windows, but I doubt we'll find anything tonight." "Perhaps not," Miss Marple said, her eyes drifting to Clarence, who was now laughing with the peacock feather woman, though his hand strayed to his pocket, as if checking something. "But it's curious, isn't it? So much excitement over a necklace when there's talk of a diamond." Beatrice's gaze sharpened, but she said nothing, only nodded, and moved to reassure the guests. Miss Marple remained on the settee, her thoughts racing. The blackout had been brief, too brief for a thief to navigate the crowded hall without being noticed, unless the thief was already near Sylvia, or the theft was planned with precision. And why a choker so publicly worn when the diamond was the Manor's true prize? As the gala resumed, the quartet striking up a cheerful polka, Miss Marple's eyes followed Grayson, who was now conferring with a footman near the east wing doors. His movements were deliberate, but she caught the way his hand lingered on the door handle as if tempted to open it. She made another mental note. Grayson knew more than he let on, and his role in the Manor's secrets was worth exploring. The evening drew to a close with a toast from Beatrice, her voice ringing with warmth as she thanked the guests for their company. Miss Marple joined the applause, her smile polite, but her mind elsewhere. The theft of Sylvia's choker was a distraction, she was certain, designed to draw attention from something larger perhaps, the Harrow diamond itself. Clarence's earlier visit to the East Wing, Edmund's tension with Sylvia, and Grayson's watchful presence were all threads in the same tapestry, and she was determined to unravel it as the guests dispersed. Miss Marple lingered, declining the Colonel's offer to escort her to her room. Instead, she approached the East Wing doors, her steps light and unhurried. The hall was quieter now, the chandeliers dimmed, and she paused to listen. A faint creak came from beyond the doors, followed by the soft thud of a footstep. Someone was there, moving in the shadows. She didn't investigate, not yet. The gala had given her enough to ponder, and she preferred to choose her moments carefully. Returning to her room, she sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, though her needles remained still. The blackout, the scream, the stolen choker they were pieces of a puzzle, and the East Wing held the key. Tomorrow she would find a way to explore it, perhaps with Beatrice's blessing. For now Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The gala had revealed more than its glittering surface suggested, and she was one step closer to the truth. The Harrow diamond, with its whispered curse, was at the heart of this mystery, and she would not rest until its shadows were brought to light. Chapter 4. A glimpse behind the mask. The morning after the gala dawned soft and misty, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and roses. Miss Jane Marple sat at her window in Harrow Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as she watched the gardens emerge from the fog. Her room, with its chintz curtains and mahogany bureau, offered a clear view of the East Wing, where last night's creak and thud still lingered in her mind. The stolen pearl choker, the blackout, and Clarence Vale's furtive glances toward the East Wing doors had woven a web of suspicion, and Miss Marple was determined to tug at its threads. She dressed in a sensible tweed skirt and a cream blouse, her straw hat replaced by a discreet headscarf, perfect for blending into the Manor's quieter corners. Breakfast was a subdued affair, the guests nursing headaches or whispering about Sylvia Dunworth's missing necklace. Beatrice, ever the gracious hostess, presided over the dining room with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sylvia, pale but composed, wore a high-necked dress that hid the absence of her choker, while Clarence entertained the table with a story about a London auction, his charm as polished as ever. Edmund Harrow, however, was absent, a fact that drew Miss Marple's notice. "Edmund's taken to his room with a migraine," Beatrice explained when Miss Marple inquired, her tone light but her fingers tightening on her coffee cup. The Gala was rather overwhelming, I'm afraid. "Poor young man," Miss Marple said, her voice sympathetic, but her mind alert. A migraine, or a convenient excuse to avoid scrutiny? She resolved to keep an eye on Edmund's movements, but for now her focus was elsewhere, the East Wing, where Clarence had been spotted before the gala and where the Harrow diamond was supposedly kept. After breakfast, Miss Marple sought out Mrs. Tuttle, the Manor's housekeeper, whose name had surfaced in village gossip as a font of quiet knowledge. She found her in the pantry, a cozy room lined with jars of preserves and bridles of dried herbs. Mrs. Tuttle was a stout woman with graying curls and hands that moved with brisk efficiency as she polished a silver candlestick. Her eyes, though, held a warmth that invited trust, and Miss Marple knew at once she'd found an ally. "Good morning, Mrs. Tuttle," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I couldn't help but admire the Manor's upkeep. It's quite remarkable." Mrs. Tuttle's face softened. "Kind of you to say, Miss Marple. It's a big old place, but I do my best to keep it shining." "You must know every nook and cranny," Miss Marple said, settling onto a stool as if settling in for a chat. "I'm rather curious about the East Wing. Lady Beatrice mentioned it's full of history-old portraits, perhaps." Mrs. Tuttle's polishing slowed, her eyes flicking to the door. "The East Wing? Oh, it's mostly storage now, old furniture, family relics. Not much to see unless you're fond of dust. But such a grand house," Miss Marple pressed, her tone light. "I heard Mr. Vale was quite taken with it yesterday, before the gala. Perhaps he found something of interest?" Mrs. Tuttle's hands stilled, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she'd pushed too far. But then the housekeeper leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Mr. Vale, you say? I did see him near the East Wing, poking about the old library door. Looked like he was waiting for someone, but when I passed by, he hurried off. Odd, I thought, for a guest to be so curious about a dusty wing." "Odd indeed," Miss Marple sighed, her eyes bright with interest. "And no one else was there?" "Not that I saw," Mrs. Tuttle said, resuming her polishing. "But that wing's got a queer feel to it. Always has. Some say it's the diamonds doing cursed, they call it. I don't hold with such nonsense, but—" She trailed off, her gaze distant. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the information. Clarence in the East Wing, near the library door, before the gala's chaos. The blackout and the stolen choker felt more like a diversion with every passing hour, and the East Wing was the key. She thanked Mrs. Tuttle, promising to share a recipe for lavender scones, and left the pantry with a plan forming. The Manor was quiet as she made her way to the East Wing, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The hall was lined with portraits of Harrow ancestors, their stern faces watching her progress. She paused at the library door, a heavy oak affair with an ornate brass handle. It was locked, as she'd expected, but she noted the faint scuff. Marks on the floor, as if someone had lingered here recently. Further down the hall, painting caught her eye, a somber depiction of a woman in Victorian dress, her hand resting on a velvet box that could only contain a jewel. The Harrow diamond, perhaps? Miss Marple stepped closer, her fingers brushing the frame. To her surprise, it shifted slightly, revealing a faint seam in the wall behind it. Her heart quickened, but she didn't press further, not yet. Instead, she tapped the frame gently, and it swung back, exposing a small, concealed safe, its lock gleaming but marred by fresh scratches. She didn't touch it. The safe was a discovery, but opening it without Beatrice's knowledge would be reckless. Besides, the scratches suggested someone else had already tried and failed to access its contents. Clarence, perhaps, or another player in this intricate game. Miss Marple retraced her steps, her mind buzzing. The safe, the east wing, Clarence's furtive movements. It all pointed to the diamond, but the stolen choker nagged at her. Why steal something so visible when the real prize was hidden? A distraction, yes, but for what purpose? And who else was involved? Back in the drawing room, she found Beatrice overseeing the arrangement of flowers for the evening's dinner. "Jane, you've been exploring," Beatrice said, her tone teasing but her eyes sharp. "Find anything to pique your curiosity?" "Oh, just admiring the portraits," Miss Marple said, her voice airy. "The east wing has such character. That painting of the lady with the velvet box quite striking." Beatrice's smile tightened. "My great-aunt, Eleanor Harrow. A bit of a mystery, that one. The box held the diamond, or so the story goes. But it's safe now, Jane, I assure you." "Of course," Miss Marple said, noting the slight tremor in Beatrice's voice. She didn't press further, instead turning the conversation to the Gala's success. But her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the morning's findings. Clarence's presence in the east wing, the scratched safe, Mrs. Tuttle's unease, they were all threads, and the diamond was the needle pulling them together. Dot, as she retired to her room to dress for dinner, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The east wing held secrets, and the safe was a step closer to uncovering them. She would need to tread carefully, for the Manor's shadows were deeper than she'd anticipated, and the players Clarence, Sylvia, Edmund, even Grayson were guarding their cards closely. But Miss Marple was patient, and she knew that a single glance at the right moment could unravel even the most carefully constructed facade. Chapter 5. The Stranger's Tale. The late morning light filtered through the tall windows of Harrow Manor's morning room, casting delicate patterns on the parquet floor. Miss Jane Marple sat near a rosewood table, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a pale blue shawl, her eyes alert beneath the brim of her headscarf. The house was quieter today, the frenetic energy of the Gala replaced by a subdued hum, as if the Manor itself were holding its breath. The stolen pearl choker, Clarence Vale's furtive movements, and the scratched safe in the east wing weighed on her mind, each a piece of a puzzle that was growing more intricate by the hour. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the front entrance, a sharp rap on the door, followed by Grayson's measured tread and a low exchange of voices. Miss Marple's needles paused as she tilted her head, catching the edge of a new voice, brusque and unfamiliar. Moments later, Lady Beatrice entered the morning room, her face a mix of curiosity and caution, accompanied by a man Miss Marple hadn't seen before. "Jane, allow me to introduce Mr. Gideon Frost," Beatrice said, her tone polite but guarded. He's just arrived, claiming to be a private investigator hired to look into certain matters. Mr. Frost was a lean man in his 40s, with a hawkish face and eyes that seemed to catalogue everything in the room. His suit, charcoal and impeccably tailored, contrasted with the slight dishevelment of his sandy hair, as if he'd traveled in haste. He carried a leather satchel, its edges worn, and his handshake, when he offered it to Miss Marple, was firm but brief. "A pleasure, Miss Marple," Frost said, his voice clipped with a faint trace of a northern accent. "Lady Beatrice tells me you're a guest here. I hope I'm not intruding on your holiday." "Not at all, Mr. Frost," Miss Marple replied, her smile mild but her gaze sharp. "I find a bit of intrigue rather invigorating. May I ask what brings you to Harrow Manor?" Frost hesitated, glancing at Beatrice, who nodded slightly. "I've been engaged to recover a certain item," he said, choosing his words with care. "A family heirloom, you might say. I'm here to ensure it's safe and to investigate any irregularities." "The Harrow diamond, I presume?" Miss Marple said, her tone innocent, but her eyes watching his reaction. Frost's jaw tightened, just for a moment, before he offered a thin smile. "You're well informed, Miss Marple." "Yes, the diamond. Lady Beatrice has concerns about its security, especially after last night's unfortunate incident." Beatrice's fingers tightened on her cane. "The choker theft has everyone on edge, Jane. I thought a professional might set things right." Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. A private investigator, arriving so soon after the Gala's drama, was intriguing too convenient, perhaps. Frost's credentials were vague, and his familiarity with the diamond suggested prior knowledge. She decided to test him. "You must know the Manor well, Mr. Frost," she said, her voice light. "To take on such a task, I mean, the East Wing. For instance, quite a maze, isn't it?" Frost's eyes narrowed slightly, but he recovered quickly. "I've studied the plans," he said. "Old houses like this have their secrets, but I'm accustomed to finding my way." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her smile unwavering. "And I suppose you'll be speaking with the guests? Mr. Vale, perhaps, or Miss Dunworth." Frost's expression remained impassive, but she caught the faintest twitch of his fingers on his satchel. "I'll speak with everyone necessary," he said. "No stone unturned, as they say." Beatrice excused herself to attend to a household matter, leaving Miss Marple alone with Frost. She seized the moment, her tone still conversational, but probing. "You must have seen many curious cases, Mr. Frost. Tell me, do you believe in curses? The village is full of talk about the diamond's ill luck." Frost leaned back, his smile more guarded now. "Curses are for storybooks, Miss Marple. In my experience, trouble comes from people, not jewels. Greed, jealousy, secrets, those are the real curses." "A very sensible view," she said, though her mind was racing. His dismissal of the curse was too quick, too rehearsed, and his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of calculation. She decided to push a little further. "And yet, the diamond's history is rather colorful, isn't it? Vanishing, reappearing, always with a scandal attached. One might think it attracts trouble." Frost's smile faded. "You've done your homework, Miss Marple. But I'm here to find facts, not chase ghost stories. If you'll excuse me, I have inquiries to make." He rose, his satchel clutched tightly, and left the room with a nod. Miss Marple watched him go, her needles clicking steadily. Frost's arrival was no coincidence, she was certain. His knowledge of the Manor, his vague credentials, and his guarded responses suggested he was more than a hired investigator. Was he here to recover the diamond or to ensure it stayed hidden? She decided to follow her instincts, which were now humming with suspicion. Slipping her knitting into her bag, she made her way to the library, not the East Wing's locked room, but the main library on the ground floor, a haven of leather-bound books and polished oak. She had a hunch that Frost's inquiries might lead him there, and she wanted to observe him unnoticed. The library was empty when she arrived, its tall shelves casting long shadows in the midday light. She settled into an armchair near a window, partially hidden by a heavy curtain, and opened a volume of local history, her eyes on the door. Sure. Enough. Frost entered minutes later, his satchel still in hand. He moved with purpose, scanning the shelves before pausing at a section labeled Harrow Family Archives. Miss Marple watched as he pulled out a slim ledger, flipping through its pages with a frown. His fingers lingered on a particular entry, and he muttered something under his breath, too low for her to catch. Then, to her surprise, he slipped the ledger into his satchel and glanced around, as if ensuring he was alone. Satisfied, he left the library, his steps quick and silent. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained still, her book open on her lap. Frost had taken something tied to the Harrow family, perhaps the diamond itself. His familiarity with the Manor's layout, his quick dismissal of the curse, and now this secretive act all pointed to a deeper involvement. Was he working for someone else, or was he the orchestrator of the Manor's unrest? She closed the book and rose, her mind turning over the possibilities. The ledger could hold clues to the diamond's history, or to the safe she'd found in the East Wing. She needed to speak with Mrs. Tuttle again, or perhaps Miss Pym, who seemed to know more than she let on. But first she would keep an eye on Frost, whose presence had shifted the puzzle's pieces in a way she hadn't anticipated. At luncheon, the atmosphere was strained, the guests subdued by the choker theft and the whispers of the diamond's curse. Clarence Vale was his usual charming self, but Miss Marple noted his frequent glances at Frost, who sat at the far end of the table, his satchel at his feet. Sylvia Dunworth, still pale, avoided Edmund's gaze, while Beatrice maintained a brittle cheerfulness, her eyes flicking to Frost with barely concealed unease. Miss Marple engaged the colonel in light conversation, steering it toward Frost's arrival. "A private investigator. How exciting," she said, her tone guileless. "Do you think he'll solve the mystery of Miss Dunworth's choker?" The colonel snorted, his mustache twitching. "Doubt it. Fellow looks more like a fox in a henhouse than a detective. Saw him poking around the stables this morning. Odd place for an investigator, if you ask me." "Perhaps he's thorough," Miss Marple said, filing away the information. The stables, like the East Wing, were a place to explore. Frost's movements were too erratic, too purposeful, to be those of a hired hand. As the meal ended, Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air. She stepped into the gardens, her eyes scanning the grounds for any sign of Frost. The stables were a short walk away, tucked behind a row of elms, and she made a mental note to visit them later, perhaps under the guise of admiring Beatrice's horses. For now she was content to let the day's discoveries settle, her mind weaving together the threads of Frost's arrival, Clarence's nerves, and the safe's scratches. Returning to her room, she sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, though her needles remained still. Gideon Frost was a new player in the Manor's drama, and his tale of being a private investigator didn't quite ring true. She would watch him closely, for his actions suggested he knew more about the Harrow diamond and the Manor's shadows than he let on. With a quiet satisfaction, Miss Marple resolved to unravel his story, certain that one well-placed glance could crack the facade he was so carefully maintaining. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, its rays slanting through the tall windows of Harrow Manor's conservatory, where Miss Jane Marple sat with a cup of chamomile tea, her knitting bag at her side. The conservatory was a haven of green, with ferns spilling from terracotta pots and orchids blooming in delicate profusion. Yet the air felt heavy, as if the glass walls trapped not just heat, but the weight of unspoken secrets. Miss Marple's mind was alive with the threads she'd gathered. The scratched safe in the east wing, Clarence Vale's nervous glances, Gideon Frost's dubious credentials, and the stolen pearl choker, which she was now certain was a distraction. From the true prize, the Harrow diamond, her morning had been spent in the village, a calculated excursion under the pretense of visiting the post office. In truth, she'd lingered at the tea shop, where the locals' chatter was as rich as the scones. The Harrow diamond, it seemed, was more than a jewel. It was a legend woven into the village's fabric, tied to a scandal that had fractured the Harrow family decades ago. The details were vague whispers of betrayal, a lost fortune, and a curse that clung to the diamond like dust. But Miss Marple knew that even half-remembered stories held kernels of truth. Back at the Manor, she'd chosen the conservatory for its quiet, hoping to catch a moment with Beatrice, or perhaps overhear another revealing snippet. The room was empty save for a gardener tending to a wilting fern, his hands gentle, but his face lined with worry. Miss Marple noted his name Tompkins. She recalled from Mrs. Tuttle's introductions and filed away his unease for later consideration. Her patience was rewarded when Sylvia Dunworth entered, her emerald silk dress replaced by a simpler frock, though her posture remained as guarded as ever. She paused by a cluster of orchids, her fingers brushing the petals, unaware of Miss Marple's presence in the corner. "Miss Dunworth," Miss Marple said softly, her voice warm but deliberate. "What a pleasant surprise. The conservatory is quite a refuge, isn't it?" Sylvia started, her hand jerking back from the flowers. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't see you there." "Yes, it's peaceful. I needed a moment away from the house." "I quite understand," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking gently. "The Gala's excitement must have been trying, especially with your necklace stolen. Such a shock." Sylvia's lips tightened, but she nodded. "A shock, yes, but it's just a necklace. I'm more concerned about other matters, Miss." Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle curiosity. "Other matters? The Manor does seem to have its share of whispers, doesn't it? I've heard talk of the Harrow diamond, such a fascinating history." Sylvia's eyes flickered, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might deflect. But then she sighed, sinking onto a wicker bench. "It's more than fascinating, Miss Marple, it's a burden. The diamond's been nothing but trouble for this family. My great-uncle Beatrice's father was betrayed over it, you know. His own brother tried to steal it, or so the story goes. It split the family apart." "How dreadful," Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic, but her mind sharp. A betrayal like that leaves scars, doesn't it? And now, with all this talk of a curse, Sylvia's laugh was brittle. A curse? Village nonsense. But the diamond does seem to bring out the worst in people. Greed, mostly. Edmund thinks it's his by right, you know. He's obsessed with it, though he'd never admit it. Edmund? Miss Marple's voice was soft, encouraging. He does seem rather intense. Sylvia hesitated, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her sleeve. He's angry. Always has been. Thinks the diamond was stolen from his side of the family, that Beatrice's father cheated his grandfather. It's why he's so cold to me. I'm tied to Beatrice's line, you see. But I don't care about the diamond. I just want... She trailed off, her gaze drifting to the glass ceiling. Miss Marple nodded, her needles never faltering. Sylvia's candor was unexpected, but it confirmed her suspicions. The diamond was more than a jewel. It was a symbol of old wounds, still raw. Edmund's resentment, Clarence's probing, and now Gideon Frost's arrival, all pointed to a family feud reignited by the diamond's presence. But Sylvia's pause intrigued her. What did she want, if not the diamond? Before she could press. Further, the conservatory door swung open, and Miss Pym, the librarian, entered, clutching a small notebook. Her spectacles glinted as she spotted Sylvia, and she hesitated, as if unsure whether to approach. "Miss Pym, do join us," Miss Marple called, her smile disarming. "We were just admiring the orchids." Miss Pym shuffled forward, her nervousness palpable. "Oh, I didn't mean to intrude. I was just looking for a quiet spot to make some notes." "Notes?" Sylvia's tone sharpened, and Miss Marple noted the sudden tension between the two women. "About what?" "Just library matters," Miss Pym said, her voice faltering. "Cataloging, you know. Nothing important." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the notebook, its pages dog-eared and filled with tight, precise handwriting. Miss Pym's discomfort, so like her reaction to Clarence at the tea party, suggested she was entangled in the Manor's secrets. Perhaps she'd seen something in her archives or in the ledger Gideon Frost had taken from the library. The conversation turned to lighter topics, with Sylvia excusing herself soon after, claiming a headache. Miss Pym lingered, her fingers fidgeting with her notebook, and Miss Marple seized the opportunity. "You must see such interesting things in the library, Miss Pym," she said, her tone conversational. "Old records, family histories, perhaps even something about the Harrow diamond." Miss Pym's cheeks flushed. "Oh, not much, Miss Marple. Just bits and pieces. The Harrows have always been private about their affairs." "But you're so thorough," Miss Marple said, her smile encouraging. "I heard Mr. Frost was looking at the family archives yesterday. Did he find anything of note?" Miss Pym's eyes widened, and she clutched her notebook tighter. "Mr. Frost? I didn't see him there. But the archives are open to guests." "Of course. I mean, if Lady Beatrice allows it." "Of course," Miss Marple said, noting the lie. Miss Pym had seen Frost, she was certain, and her nervousness suggested she knew what he'd taken. She didn't press further, instead complimenting Miss Pym on her dedication and letting her scurry off. Alone again, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind piecing together the morning's revelations. Sylvia's talk of betrayal confirmed the diamond's role in the family's fractured past, while Edmund's obsession hinted at a motive for his secretive behavior. Miss Pym's unease and Frost's theft of the ledger pointed to hidden knowledge, perhaps documented proof of the diamond's history or its current whereabouts. She decided to take a walk to the stables, prompted by the Colonel's comment about Frost's odd behavior there. The stables were a sturdy stone building, fragrant with hay and leather, and she found Tompkins, the gardener, brushing down a chestnut marry. His earlier worry seemed to have deepened, and Miss Marple approached. With her usual tact, "Such fine horses," she said, patting the mare's flank. "You must be proud of the Manor stables, Mr. Tompkins." He nodded, his hand steady, but his eyes guarded. "Aye, miss, they're a fine lot. But it's been odd lately strangers about, at all hours." "Strangers?" Miss Marple's tone was curious, not alarmed. "Like Mr. Frost, perhaps?" "I heard he was seen here." Tompkins hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Saw him last night after the gala. Poking around the tack room, he was. Looked like he was searching for something, but he left quick when he heard me coming." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. "How curious. Perhaps he's just thorough, as investigators are." "Maybe," Tompkins said, unconvinced. "But it ain't right, a man like that sneaking about." She thanked him and returned to the Manor, her mind buzzing. Frost's presence in the stables, the stolen ledger, Sylvia's revelations, and the lingering shadow of the diamond's past were all connected, she was sure. The scandal of Beatrice's father and his brother, the betrayal Sylvia had mentioned, was the key to understanding the present tensions. Had the diamond been stolen before, only to resurface now? And was Frost here to uncover that truth or to bury it? As she settled into her room, her knitting in her lap, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The shadows of the past were coming into focus, and with them the motives of those around her. She would need to tread carefully for the Manors. Secrets were guarded by more than locks and safes, but she was patient, and she knew that the truth, like a well-tended garden, would reveal itself in time. Chapter 7. The Midnight Encounter. Moon hung low over Harrow Manor, its pale light casting eerie shadows across the gardens and gilding the east wing's ivy-clad walls. Miss Jane Marple sat by her bedroom window, her knitting untouched, her eyes fixed on the darkened grounds below. The Manor was silent, save for the occasional creak of settling timbers, but her mind was anything but still. The day's revelations, Sylvia Dunworth's tale of family betrayal, Gideon Frost's pilfered ledger, and the gardener Tompkins' report of Frost's nocturnal prowling had sharpened her instincts. The Harrow diamond, with its tangled history, was at the heart of the Manor's unrest, and Miss Marple was certain the east wing held the next clue. She had retired early after dinner, pleading fatigue, but sleep was far from her intentions. The Gala's blackout, the stolen choker, and Clarence Vale's lingering near the east wing before the event suggested a pattern, one that pointed to a scheme unfolding under cover of darkness. When the hall clock struck 11, she slipped into a dark cardigan and soft-soled shoes, her movements as quiet as the moonlight. A midnight exploration was risky, but Miss Marple had learned long ago that secrets revealed themselves to those willing to seek them out. The Manor's corridors were dim, lit only by the occasional flicker of a wall sconce. She moved with care, her small frame blending into the shadows, her senses attuned to every sound. The east wing was her destination, but as she approached the grand staircase, A faint rustle from below made her pause. She pressed herself against a tapestry, its faded threads depicting a hunt, and peered over the banister. A figure moved in the lower hall, a man by the breadth of his shoulders, his steps quick but cautious. The moonlight caught his profile Clarence Vale, his dark curls unmistakable, his hands stuffed into the pockets of a long coat. He glanced around, then slipped through the double doors leading to the east wing. Leaving them slightly ajar, Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained calm. Clarence, sneaking about at midnight, confirmed her suspicions of his involvement. She waited a moment, ensuring no one else followed, then descended the stairs, her steps silent on the thick carpet. The east wing's doors loomed before her, the faint creak from the Gala night echoing in her memory. She eased one door open, just enough to slip through, and entered the shadowed corridor. The east wing was colder than the rest of the manor, its air heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. The portraits she'd seen earlier glared down, their eyes seeming to follow her as she moved toward the library door, where Mrs. Tuttle had spotted Clarence before the gala. The door was locked as expected, but a faint glow spilled from beneath. It a candle, perhaps, or a flashlight? She crept closer, her ears straining. A soft scrape came from within, followed by a low curse. Clarence's voice, unmistakable. Miss Marple pressed herself against the wall, her breath steady despite the thrill of discovery. She considered her options. Knocking would alert him, but waiting might reveal more. She chose the latter, her patience honed by years of unraveling. Human nature's knots. The scraping grew louder, then stopped abruptly. A second set of footsteps, heavier and less cautious, approached from the far end of the corridor. Miss Marple shrank back, her small form hidden by a suit of armor. The new arrival paused, and she caught a glimpse of a tall figure too tall for Frost, too broad for Edmund. Grayson, the butler, or someone else entirely. "Vale, you fool," a low voice hissed, unfamiliar but sharp with irritation. "You're making too much noise." "I'm trying," Clarence snapped, his voice muffled through the door. "This lock's trickier than I thought." "Leave it," the other voice said. "We can't risk being seen. Not tonight." The footsteps retreated, and Miss Marple heard Clarence mutter something before the glow beneath the door vanished. She waited, counting to 20, then eased forward to examine the library door. The lock was indeed scratched, fresh marks glinting in the moonlight, marks that matched those on the safe she'd found behind the painting. Clarence had been trying to break in, but who was his accomplice? She didn't linger. The risk of being caught was too great, and she had what she needed: confirmation of Clarence's intent in the presence of a second player, someone bold enough to roam the manor at midnight. She retraced her steps, her mind racing as she slipped back to her room. Undetected. Morning brought a fresh development. At breakfast, Beatrice announced that a groundskeeper had reported a broken window near the east wing, discovered at dawn. The guests murmured, their unease palpable, and Miss Marple noted Clarence's sudden stillness, his coffee cup pausing midder. Sylvia, pale and withdrawn, avoided eye contact, while Gideon Frost, seated near the window, studied the group with his hawkish gaze. "Likely vandals," Beatrice said, her tone dismissive, but her eyes troubled. "Grayson's handling it, and the police have been informed. No need to worry." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic, but her thoughts were elsewhere. A broken window, so soon after Clarence's midnight venture, was no coincidence. Had he broken it to cover his tracks, or had his accomplice acted alone? And what were they after, the diamond or something else hidden in the east wing? She decided to test the waters. Joining Beatrice for a stroll in the gardens after breakfast, she steered the conversation toward the Manor's security. "Such a pity about the window," she said, her voice gentle. "The east wing seems to attract trouble, doesn't it? First the choker, now this." Beatrice's cane tapped sharply on the gravel path. "It's an old house, Jane. Things break. But I'll admit I'm uneasy. The diamond's safe, I assure you, but all this fuss makes me wonder." "Wonder what, my dear?" Miss Marple asked, her eyes on a bed of lavender, though her attention was fixed on Beatrice's tone. Beatrice hesitated, then lowered her voice. "If someone's trying to unsettle us, Clarence, perhaps, or even that Frost fellow. He's been asking odd questions, poking about the stables and the library. I don't trust him." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions about Frost deepening. His theft of the ledger, his night-time wanderings, and now Beatrice's doubts painted a picture of a man with his own agenda. But Clarence's midnight attempt on the library lock and the mysterious accomplice suggested a conspiracy broader than one rogue investigator. The day passed quietly, with Miss Marple keeping a discreet eye on Clarence. He was charming as ever, regaling the colonel with tales of London, but his laughter was too loud, his glances toward the east wing too frequent. At tea, she caught him exchanging a quick look with Miss Pym, who blushed and dropped her teaspoon, a small gesture, but one that confirmed her involvement, however peripheral. As evening fell, Miss Marple retired to her room, her knitting in, her lap but her mind on the night's events. The broken window, Clarence's failed break-in, and the unknown accomplice were pieces of a puzzle that was beginning to take shape. The diamond was the key, but its history Sylvia's talk of betrayal. The ledger Frost had stolen suggested motives rooted in the past as much as the present. She felt a quiet satisfaction as she gazed out at the moonlit gardens. The midnight encounter had given her a glimpse into Clarence's plans, and the broken window was a clue to his desperation. She would need to explore the east wing again, perhaps with Mrs. Tuttle's help, to uncover what lay behind the library door. For now she was content to let the Manor's shadows deepen, knowing that each step brought her closer to the truth. Chapter 8. Sylvia's Secret. Morning mist clung to the grounds of Harrow Manor, softening the edges of the rose beds and muting the bird song to a gentle murmur. Miss Jane Marple sat in the Manor's morning room, a cozy space adorned with chintz, cushions, and a crackling fire, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on her pale blue shawl. The events of the previous night, Clarence Vale's midnight attempt on the east wing's library lock, the mysterious accomplice, and the broken window had sharpened her focus. The Harrow diamond, with its tangled history of betrayal, was the thread tying the Manor's tensions together. But Miss Marple sensed that Sylvia Dunworth held the key piece of the puzzle. Sylvia had been subdued since the gala, her usual poise overshadowed by a quiet unease that Miss Marple had noted at every turn. Her revelation in the conservatory about the family's past, Edmund's obsession with the diamond, and the old scandal between Beatrice's father and his brother had hinted at deeper motives. Miss Marple decided it was time to draw Sylvia out to see what lay behind her guarded glances and hesitant words. She found her opportunity after breakfast, when Sylvia lingered in the drawing-room, leafing through a magazine with little interest. Miss Marple approached, her smile warm and inviting, her knitting bag slung over her arm like a shield of harmlessness. "Miss Dunworth, might I trouble you for a chat?" Miss Marple said, settling into an armchair opposite Sylvia. "I've been meaning to ask about your garden. You mentioned it was a disgrace, but I'm sure you've some lovely ideas for it." Sylvia looked up, her emerald eyes wary, but softening at Miss Marple's gentle tone. "Oh, Miss Marple, you're kind to ask. I'm afraid I've no talent for gardening. It's all I can do to keep my roses from wilting." "Nonsense," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly. "A little patience is all it takes, and perhaps a bit of pruning, cutting away what's not needed to let the true beauty shine. People are much the same, don't you think?" Sylvia's fingers paused on the magazine, her gaze flickering to Miss Marple's face. "People? I suppose so. Some need more pruning than others." Miss Marple smiled, sensing an opening. "Indeed, take this business with the diamond, such a lot of fuss over a jewel. It seems to bring out all sorts of thorns, doesn't it? I was so struck by what you said yesterday about the family's history. It must weigh heavily, carrying such a legacy." Sylvia's posture stiffened, but she didn't look away. "It does," she admitted, her voice low. "The Harrows are a proud lot, but pride can be a burden. That diamond, it's not just a jewel. It's a reminder of everything that went wrong." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "The betrayal you mentioned between Beatrice's father and his brother, it sounds like a wound that never healed." Sylvia's fingers tightened on the magazine, crumpling its edge. "It didn't. My great-uncle Beatrice's father kept the diamond, but his brother, Edmund's grandfather, swore it was stolen from him. There was a falling out, a terrible one. Lawsuits, accusations, even a duel, or so the stories say. The diamond vanished for years after that, only to turn up when Beatrice inherited the manor. And now—" She trailed off, her eyes distant. "And now it's stirring up old grudges," Miss Marple finished gently. "Edmund believes it's his, you said. That must be difficult for you, caught between him and Beatrice." Sylvia's lips parted as if to protest, but then she sighed, her shoulders sagging. "It is. Edmund's so bitter, so convinced he's been cheated. He thinks I'm on Beatrice's side because of my inheritance, but I don't care about the diamond. I just want—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I want peace for all of us." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes soft but piercing. Sylvia's sincerity was genuine, but her hesitation suggested she was holding something back, a secret, perhaps tied to her own place in the family's drama. "Peace is a rare thing," Miss Marple said, "especially when trust is scarce. You've noticed Mr. Frost, I'm sure. He seems rather curious about the Manor's secrets." Sylvia's gaze sharpened, and for a moment Miss Marple caught a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Frost, he's unsettling. I saw him talking to Clarence yesterday near the stables. They looked like they were arguing, but when I approached, they stopped. I don't trust either of them." "Nor should you, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone light but her mind racing. Sylvia's observation of Frost and Clarence together was new and it aligned with Tompkins' report of Frost's nocturnal prowling. Were they conspirators or rivals? And what did Sylvia know that made her so wary? Before she could probe further, the drawing-room door opened, and Gideon Frost himself entered, his hawkish face set in a polite smile. He carried his satchel, as always, and his eyes flicked from Sylvia to Miss Marple, assessing the scene. "Miss Dunworth, Miss Marple," he said, nodding. "I hope I'm not interrupting. Lady Beatrice asked me to check on the guests, make sure everyone's settled after last night's excitement." Sylvia stood abruptly, her magazine falling to the floor. "I'm fine, Mr. Frost, just needed a quiet moment. Excuse me." She hurried out, her steps quick and uneven, leaving Miss Marple alone with Frost. Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. "How kind of you to check, Mr. Frost. Miss Dunworth seems a bit shaken, though. The theft of her choker must be weighing on her." Frost's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile remained. "Understandable. A theft like that unsettles everyone. I'm doing my best to get to the bottom of it." "I'm sure you are," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "You seem very thorough. The stables, the library, the East Wing, you've been quite busy." Frost's smile faltered, just for a moment, and Miss Marple noted the way his hand tightened on his satchel. "Just doing my job, Miss Marple. Old houses like this have plenty of corners to check." "Of course," she said, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "And old houses often hold old secrets, don't they? Like the diamond's history. Such a fascinating tale." Frost's expression hardened, but he recovered quickly. "Fascinating, yes. But I deal in facts, not tales. If you'll excuse me, I have inquiries to make." He left, his steps brisk, and Miss Marple leaned back, her mind buzzing. Sylvia's revelation about the family's past had deepened her understanding of Edmund's motives, but her fear of Frost and her observation of his argument with Clarence suggested a web of alliances and betrayals. Frost's reaction to her mention of the East Wing confirmed his interest in the safe, or perhaps the library's locked room. She decided to seek out Mrs. Tuttle again, hoping the housekeeper might shed light on Sylvia's role in the Manor's drama. She found her in the laundry room, folding linens with her usual efficiency. Miss Marple approached with a smile, complimenting the Manor's crisp sheets before steering the conversation to Sylvia. "Miss Dunworth seems such a thoughtful young woman," Miss Marple said, helping to fold a tablecloth. "But she's troubled, isn't she? All this talk of the diamond must be hard with her family ties." Mrs. Tuttle's hand slowed, her eyes flicking to the door. "She's a good sort, Miss Dunworth, but she's caught in the middle, poor thing. Her mother was a Harrow. You?" "No, from Beatrice's side. There's bad blood with Edmund's lot, and she feels it keenly." "Bad blood over the diamond?" Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle. Mrs. Tuttle nodded. "Aye, and more besides. Sylvia's got her own inheritance, but it's tied up in trusts and such. Edmund thinks she's after the diamond to secure her place, but I reckon she just wants to be free of it all. She's been asking me about old family papers, though quiet-like, so Beatrice wouldn't know." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. Sylvia's interest in family papers could mean she was searching for proof of the diamond's ownership or something else entirely. Perhaps the ledger Frost had taken held answers she sought. "How curious," she said. "She must trust you a great deal, Mrs. Tuttle." The housekeeper blushed, pleased. "I try to help where I can, Miss Marple, but there's something afoot. Mark my words. That Mr. Frost, snooping about, and Mr. Vale, always where he shouldn't be, it's not right." Miss Marple thanked her and returned to her room, her mind weaving together the day's threads. Sylvia's secret was not just her fear of the diamond's curse, but her desire to escape the family's legacy. Her interest in old papers, her wariness of Frost and Clarence, and her strained relationship with Edmund pointed to a deeper truth. One Miss Marple was determined to uncover Dot as she sat by her window, her knitting in her lap. She felt a quiet satisfaction. Sylvia's candor had revealed the emotional stakes of the diamond's history, while Frost's guarded reaction and Mrs. Tuttle's insights had tightened the net around the Manor's secrets. The east wing, the ledger, and the broken window were all pieces of the same puzzle, and Miss Marple was one step closer to seeing its shape. For now she would watch and listen, knowing that the truth was beginning to emerge from the shadows. Chapter 9. The False Confession. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Harrow Manor's dining room, casting a soft glow on the polished mahogany table where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting bag at her side, and a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The atmosphere was thick with unease, the guests' chatter subdued by the lingering shock of the broken window, and Sylvia Dunworth's stolen choker. Miss Marple's mind, however, was sharp, weaving together the threads of the past few days. Clarence Vale's midnight attempt on the east wing's library lock, Gideon Frost's pilfered ledger, Sylvia's guarded revelations about the family's betrayal, and the ever-present specter of the Harrow diamond. Each clue pointed to a conspiracy, but the players were still hiding their cards. Breakfast was a tense affair, with Beatrice presiding over the table with forced cheer, her silver cane resting against her chair. Sylvia sat quietly, her eyes downcast, while Clarence entertained the colonel with a story about a Parisian art dealer, his charm masking the nervous twitch of his fingers. Edmund Harrow, who had been absent the previous day, returned, his face pale and his manner brusque. Miss Marple noted his quick glance at Sylvia, laced with resentment, and wondered again about the rift Sylvia had described, the old scandal that had split the Harrow family over the diamond. The meal was interrupted by a sudden commotion in the hall. Raised voices echoed, followed by the sharp tap of Beatrice's cane as she rose to investigate. Miss Marple followed, her steps light but purposeful, sensing an opportunity to observe the Manor's players under pressure. The guests trailed behind, their curiosity piqued, as Grayson, the butler, appeared in the doorway, his gaunt face flushed with agitation. "My lady," Grayson said, his voice low but urgent, "as a matter that requires your attention." "It's Mrs. Tuttle." Beatrice's brow furrowed. "Mrs. Tuttle? What's happened?" Before Grayson could elaborate, Edmund Harrow pushed forward, his voice sharp. "Let's have it out, then. I've had enough of whispers and secrets." Mrs. Tuttle was seen near the fireplace during the Gala's blackout rite where Sylvia's choker was stolen. "I say she's the thief." A gasp rippled through the group, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Edmund's accusation was bold, almost theatrical, and she caught the way his hands clenched, as if bracing for a reaction. Mrs. Tuttle, summoned. From the kitchen appeared moments later, her gray curls disheveled, and her face pale with shock. "Me? A thief?" Mrs. Tuttle's voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it. "I've served this house for 20 years, Mr. Edmund. I'd never touch Miss Dunworth's necklace." "Then explain why you were hovering by the fireplace," Edmund snapped, his eyes blazing. "I saw you myself skulking about when the lights went out. I was checking the candles," Mrs. Tuttle retorted, her hands twisting her apron. "The blackout startled everyone, and I wanted to be sure the room was safe." Miss Marple watched the exchange closely, her knitting needles still in her bag, but her mind as active as ever. Edmund's accusation felt forced, his tone too vehement. For a simple suspicion, she glanced at Sylvia, who stood rigid, her lips pressed tight, and at Clarence, whose casual lean against the wall belied the sharp focus in his eyes. Gideon Frost, standing near the back, observed the scene with his usual hawkish intensity, his satchel clutched tightly. Beatrice raised a hand, her voice cutting through the tension. "Enough, Edmund. This is no place for accusations, Mrs. Tuttle. I trust you implicitly. We'll let Mr. Frost investigate properly." Edmund's face reddened, but he backed down, muttering something about justice. Mrs. Tuttle, tears in her eyes, excused herself, and the guests dispersed, their murmurs filling the hall. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on Edmund, whose anger seemed to mask something deeper, guilt, perhaps, or fear. She sought out Mrs. Tuttle in the pantry, where the housekeeper was wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "My dear Mrs. Tuttle," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "I'm so sorry for that scene." Edmund was quite out of line. Mrs. Tuttle sniffled, her hands trembling. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I've never been so humiliated. Mr. Edmunds always been quick to judge, but to call me a thief, it's too much." "He's under strain," Miss Marple said, helping to stack a tray of teacups. "The diamond, I suppose, has everyone on edge. But you're no thief, and I'll make sure. Beatrice knows it." Mrs. Tuttle's gratitude was palpable, and Miss Marple seized the moment to probe. Edmund's outburst was curious, wasn't it? Almost as if he wanted to shift attention. "Have you noticed anything odd about him lately?" Mrs. Tuttle hesitated, then leaned closer. "He's been restless, Miss Marple. I caught him in the east wing 2 nights ago, near the library door, before the gala. Looked like he was waiting for someone, but he left when he saw me. And Mr. Vale was there the next night. You know about that." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Edmund in the east wing, just before Clarence's midnight venture, suggested a connection, perhaps the accomplice she'd overheard. "You've a sharp eye, Mrs. Tuttle," she said. "And what about Mr. Frost? Has he been asking you anything unusual?" Mrs. Tuttle's face darkened. "He's been poking about, asking about old family records, like Miss Dunworth did. I told him the archives are in the library, but he seemed to know that already. Makes my skin crawl, that one." Miss Marple thanked her, her thoughts turning to Edmund's accusation. It was a clumsy move, too public to be genuine, and it reeked of deflection. Was he protecting himself or someone else? The choker theft, the broken window, and now this false confession pointed to a larger scheme, one centered on the diamond and its fraught history. At luncheon, the mood was strained, with Edmund absent and Sylvia barely touching her food. Clarence, however, was in high spirits, regaling the table with a story about a lost Picasso, though Miss Marple noted his frequent glances at Frost, who sat silently, his satchel at his feet. Beatrice, attempting to lighten the atmosphere, announced a village fete for the next day, but her cheer felt forced. Miss Marple decided to observe Edmund more closely, suspecting his outburst was a sign of desperation. She caught him later in the garden, pacing near the rose arbor, his hands thrust into his pockets. She approached, her manner disarming. "Mr. Harrow, you seem troubled," she said, pausing to admire a rose. "I hope Mrs. Tuttle's feelings weren't too hurt by this morning's misunderstanding." Edmund's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "A misunderstanding, yes. I may have spoken too hastily. This business with the diamond, it's got us all on edge." "The diamond does seem to cast a long shadow," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "Sylvia mentioned its history, the old feud between your grandfather and Beatrice's father. It must be hard, carrying that weight." Edmund's eyes flashed, but he looked away, his voice low. "Harder than you know, Miss Marple. But I don't care about the diamond itself, just what it represents. Justice, perhaps." "Justice is a noble goal," she said, her eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. "But it can be a tricky thing to chase, can't it? Especially when trust is scarce." Edmund stiffened, then excused himself, his steps quick as he retreated. To the Manor. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind cataloguing his reaction. His talk of justice echoed Sylvia's story of betrayal, but his accusation against Mrs. Tuttle suggested he was hiding something, perhaps his own role, in the East Wings. Secrets dot as she returned to her room, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. Edmund's false confession had been a misstep, revealing his desperation to deflect suspicion. With Mrs. Tuttle cleared and her trust secured, Miss Marple had narrowed the field of suspects to Clarence, Frost, and Edmund himself, with Sylvia and Miss Pym as possible unwitting pawns. The village fete tomorrow would offer new opportunities to observe, and she was certain the diamond's shadow would grow darker before it was dispelled. Chapter 10. A dangerous discovery. The afternoon light bathed Harrow Manor's east wing in a soft golden glow, highlighting the intricate ivy patterns that clung to its weathered stone. Miss Jane Marple moved through the corridor with the quiet grace of a shadow, her sensible shoes silent on the worn carpet. The manor hummed with the distant preparations for the village fete, but her focus was singular. The East Wing's secrets, which she was certain held the key to the Harrow diamonds. Mystery. Edmund's false accusation against Mrs. Tuttle, Clarence Vale's midnight tampering, Gideon Frost's stolen ledger, and Sylvia Dunworth's guarded revelations had all pointed her here, to the locked library and the hidden safe she'd discovered. Behind the portrait dot, Miss Marple's morning had been spent in quiet observation, her knitting a perfect pretense as she listened to the guests' strained chatter at breakfast. Edmund's absence, Sylvia's withdrawn demeanor, and Clarence's overly bright charm had only deepened her suspicions. Frost's presence, however, was the most troubling. His hawkish eyes and guarded satchel suggested he was closer to the diamond secrets than anyone else. His theft of the ledger from the library, coupled with his nocturnal prowling, made him a wild card in the Manor's unfolding drama. She had secured Beatrice's permission to explore the East Wing under the guise of admiring its historical charm. "Just old portraits and dusty books," Beatrice had said, her smile tight. "But do be careful, Jane, the floors are uneven." Miss Marple had nodded, her expression benign, but her mind was already mapping the wing's layout, particularly the library door where Clarence had been thwarted, and the safe behind the painting of Eleanor Harrow. The East Wing was quieter than the rest of the manor, its air thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten stories. The portraits along the corridor watched her progress, their stern faces a reminder of the family's fractured past. She paused at the library door, its oak surface unyielding, the lock still bearing the scratches from Clarence's midnight attempt. She tested the handle locked, as expected, but her attention was drawn to the painting of Eleanor Harrow, the Victorian matriarch whose hand rested on a velvet box. Miss Marple glanced around, ensuring she was alone, then gently tapped. The frame. It shifted, just as it had before, revealing the hidden safe. The scratches on its lock were fresher now, deeper, as if someone had returned since her last visit. Her heart quickened, but she didn't touch the safe. Instead, she examined the surrounding wall, her fingers brushing the paneling. A faint click rewarded her efforts, and a small section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its edges worn, but its pages intact. Miss Marple's. Breath caught as she lifted it, her gloved hands careful not to disturb any traces of dust. The ledger was not the one Frost had taken from the main library. This was older, its cover embossed with the arrow crest. She opened it, her eyes scanning the cramped, elegant script. It detailed the diamond's history, its acquisition in 1843, its rumored curse, and its disappearance after the scandal between Beatrice's father and his brother. One entry dated 1892 caught her eye. Diamond secured in East Wing vault, known only to E.H. and trusted steward. Location concealed to prevent further betrayal. A vault. Not just a safe, but a hidden vault, somewhere in the East Wing. Miss Marple closed the ledger, her mind racing. The safe was a decoy, meant to distract from the true hiding place. Clarence's attempts, and perhaps Frost's, had been focused on the wrong target. She slipped the ledger into her knitting bag, intending to study it further in the privacy of her room. Before she could retreat, a shadow fell across the corridor. Gideon Frost stood at the far end, his satchel slung over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as they met hers. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but laced with suspicion. "Exploring again, I see. The East Wing's a dangerous place. For a lady alone." "Oh, Mr. Frost," Miss Marple said, her tone light but her pulse quickening. "I was just admiring the portraits. Such a rich history, don't you think?" Frost stepped closer, his gaze flicking to her knitting bag. "History can be treacherous, Miss Marple. You'd do well to leave it to professionals." There was a threat in his words, subtle but unmistakable, and Miss Marple's smile remained serene, though her mind was alert. "I'm sure you're right," she said. "But an old spinster like me enjoys a bit of harmless curiosity. I'll leave you to your work." Frost's eyes lingered on her bag, as if he sensed the ledger's presence, but he said nothing, only nodded and moved past her toward the library door. Miss Marple waited until his footsteps faded, then slipped back to the main house, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. Frost's confrontation confirmed his involvement, and his interest in the East Wing suggested he was closer to the vault's secret than she'd feared. Back in her room, she locked the door and pored over the ledger. The entries were meticulous, detailing not only the diamond's movements, but also the family's internal strife. A later note, written in a shakier hand, mentioned a secondary vault hidden behind a false panel in the East Wing's study, accessible only by a key held by the Manor's steward. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Grayson. Could he be the modern equivalent, guarding the diamond's location? She decided to keep the ledger hidden, tucking it beneath a false bottom, in her knitting bag. Frost's warning had been clear, and she knew the stakes were rising. The vault's existence changed everything, shifting the focus from the safe to a new target. Clarence, Edmund, and Frost were all circling the same prize, but their motives, greed, revenge, or something else remained unclear. At dinner, the atmosphere was strained, with Beatrice announcing extra security for the fete, citing the broken window. Clarence was his usual charming self, but Miss Marple noted his frequent glances at Frost, who sat with his satchel at his feet, his expression unreadable. Sylvia avoided Edmund, who seemed distracted, his fingers drumming on the table. Miss Marple kept her own counsel, her eyes moving between the players, her mind piecing together the ledger's clues. As she retired for the night, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The ledger was a dangerous discovery, one that confirmed the diamond's hidden vault and pointed to Grayson as a potential keyholder. Frost's threat had only strengthened her resolve, for she knew that danger often meant she was close to the truth. Tomorrow's fate would offer new opportunities to observe, and she would need to move carefully, for the Manor's shadows were growing darker, and the players were growing bolder. Chapter 11. The Culprit's Facade, the village fete, transformed St. Mary Mead's Green into a vibrant tapestry of color and sound, with bunting fluttering in the breeze, and the scent of freshly baked pies mingling with the laughter of children. Miss Jane Marple stood near a stall selling lavender sachets, her straw hat shielding her eyes as she surveyed the crowd. Her knitting bag, heavy with the hidden ledger, hung at her side, a constant reminder of the dangerous discovery she'd made in the East Wing, the Harrow diamond's secret vault, Clarence Vale's midnight tampering, Gideon Frost's threatening presence, and Sylvia Dunworth's guarded revelations had drawn the net of suspicion tighter, and Miss Marple was determined to use the fates. Lively chaos to unravel another thread of the mystery. The Manor's guests mingled with the villagers, their polished manners a stark contrast to the rustic charm of the fete. Lady Beatrice Harrow, resplendent in a lilac dress, presided over the event, her silver cane a regal accessory, as she judged a jam-making contest. Clarence Vale, his dark curls catching the sunlight, charmed a group of local girls near the maypole, his laughter ringing out but his eyes darting restlessly. Sylvia, in a simple muslin dress, lingered near a bookstall, her fingers tracing the spines as if seeking distraction. Edmund Harrow, his auburn hair mussed, stood apart, his scowl deepening as he watched Sylvia. Gideon Frost, ever the outsider, moved through the crowd with his satchel, his hawkish gaze scanning faces as if searching for a target. Miss Marple's plan was simple but bold, to orchestrate a subtle confrontation, dropping hints about the ledger to gauge reactions. She had chosen the fete for its public setting, where guarded facades might slip under the pressure of scrutiny. She began by joining Beatrice at the jam stall, her tone light as she complimented the preserves. "Such a lovely day, Beatrice," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "The fate's brought everyone out, hasn't it? Even Mr. Vale seems in high spirits, though I hear he's been quite curious about the Manor's history." Beatrice's smile tightened, her cane tapping the ground. "Clarence is always curious, Jane, too curious, perhaps. He's been asking about old family records. Odd for a guest, don't you think?" "Very odd," Miss Marple agreed, her voice mild. I found a curious ledger myself in the East Wing, full of family history, you know, about the diamond and a hidden vault. Quite fascinating." Beatrice's eyes widened, but before she could respond, Clarence approached, his charm undimmed but his posture tense. "Miss Marple, Lady Beatrice," he said, bowing slightly. "Talking about history? I'd love to hear more Harrow manners. Full of secrets, isn't it?" Miss Marple met his gaze, her smile serene but her eyes piercing. "Oh, indeed, Mr. Vale. I was just telling Beatrice about a ledger I found quite detailed, especially about the diamond's hiding place. A vault, they say, tucked away in the East Wing." Clarence's smile faltered, his hand straying to his pocket before he caught himself. "A vault? Sounds like something out of a novel. You've a knack for finding things, Miss Marple." "An old spinster's curiosity," she said, her tone disarming but her gaze unwavering. She turned to Sylvia, who had drifted closer, her face pale. "Miss Dunworth, you'd find it interesting, I'm sure. It mentions your great-uncle's feud, such a tragic story." Sylvia's fingers froze on the book she held, her eyes darting to Edmund, who had joined the group, his expression dark. I'd rather not dwell on the past," she said, her voice tight. "It's caused enough trouble." Edmund's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Frost appeared, his satchel clutched tightly. "A ledger, you say?" he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Sounds valuable. You should be careful, Miss Marple. Old documents can stir up trouble." "Miss." Marple's smile didn't waver, but her heart quickened. The reactions were telling. Clarence's pale face, Sylvia's unease, Edmund's silence, and Frost's veiled warning. She had struck a nerve, and Clarence's response was the most revealing. His facade of charm had cracked, if only for a moment, under her steady gaze. "I'm always careful, Mr. Frost," she said, her voice light. "But history has a way of coming to light, doesn't it? Especially when so many are interested." The group dispersed, Clarence excusing himself with a forced laugh, claiming a need to try the archery contest. Sylvia lingered, her eyes meeting. Miss Marple's briefly, a flicker of gratitude or perhaps fear in their depths. Edmund stalked off toward the beer tent, while Frost moved to a nearby stall, his satchel never leaving his side. Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction as she rejoined the crowd, her knitting bag a comforting weight. Clarence's reaction confirmed. His involvement likely in the attempt on the library lock and perhaps the broken window. Frost's warning suggested he knew of the ledger's significance, perhaps because it mirrored the one he'd stolen. Sylvia's unease hinted at her own secrets, while Edmund's silence spoke of a deeper resentment. She decided to keep a closer eye on Clarence, following him discreetly to the archery stall. He was laughing with the village blacksmith, his bow drawn taut, but his shots were erratic, his hands unsteady. Miss Marple noted the way he glanced over his shoulder, as if expecting pursuit. When he missed the target entirely, the blacksmith clapped him on the back, but Clarence's smile was strained, his eyes scanning the crowd. Miss Marple moved too. A nearby stall selling homemade soaps, her position offering a clear view of Clarence. She caught a glimpse of Miss Pym, the librarian, hovering near the maypole, her notebook clutched tightly. Their eyes met, and Miss Pym flinched, hurrying away. Another thread. Miss Marple thought Miss Pym's nervousness suggested she knew more about the ledger, or perhaps the vault. As the fate continued, Miss Marple mingled, her ears attuned to the village gossip. The diamond's curse was a favorite topic, with tales of lost fortunes and broken families. One villager, a wiry old man selling cider, mentioned seeing a stranger near the manor's east wing 2 nights ago, he said, with a satchel. Frost, undoubtedly, Miss Marple thought, her suspicions deepening. The fate wound down as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the green. Miss Marple returned to the manor, her mind buzzing with the day's observations. Clarence's cracked facade was a breakthrough, but Frost's warning and Sylvia's unease suggested the game was far from over. The ledger safely hidden in her bag held clues to the vault's location, and she resolved to explore the east wing's study, where the secondary vault was concealed. As she sat in her room, her knitting untouched, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The fate had been a stage, and her subtle hints had shaken the players. Clarence was desperate, Frost was dangerous, and Sylvia and Edmund were entangled in the past's shadows. The vault was the next step, and she would need to move carefully, for the culprit's facade was crumbling, and the truth was closer than ever. Chapter 12. The trap is set. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in the corner of the village hall, her knitting needles clicking softly, a gentle rhythm that belied the storm brewing in her mind. The annual St. Mary Mead flower show was in full swing, its tables laden with roses, dahlias, and chrysanthemums, their scents mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed tea. Villagers bustled about, their chatter a lively hum, but Miss Marple's faded blue eyes were fixed on one figure, Mr. Victor Langley, resplendent in a tailored suit, charming the vicar's wife with the story of his travels abroad. Her conversation with Sir Henry Clithering the previous evening had confirmed her suspicions. Langley's connection to Mrs. Whitby's late husband, a business deal gone sour, a fortune lost, had been no coincidence. The gardener's tale of a strange vial in the compost heap, coupled with the missing brooch, pointed to a motive far darker than Langley's polished exterior suggested. Yet his alibi, a morning stroll verified by 2 villagers, seemed unshakable. Miss Marple knew better than to trust appearances. A single glance from Langley at the charity tea, a fleeting flicker of unease when she'd mentioned Mrs. Whitby's prized roses, had been enough to set her mind whirring. "Mrs. Bantry," Miss Marple said softly, leaning toward her friend, who was fussing over a tray of scones. "Do you recall that lovely brooch Mrs. Whitby wore at the last tea? The one with the sapphire and the odd little clasp?" Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "Why, yes, Jane. She was so proud of it, said it was a gift from her husband. It's been missing since, well, you know." She lowered her voice. "Do you think it's important?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "Oh, I think it may be very important." The hall grew quieter as the vicar announced the prize for the best bloom. Miss Marple seized her moment. Rising with a delicate cough, she addressed the room, her voice clear yet unassuming. "Before we continue, might I ask if anyone has seen Mrs. Whitby's sapphire brooch? It was such a curious piece, rumored to hold a little secret, wasn't it? A code, perhaps, etched into the clasp?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Langley's hand froze mid-gesture, his teacup trembling slightly. Miss Marple's eyes locked onto his, her gaze as sharp as a needle. "Mr. Langley, you were so kind to Mrs. Whitby at the tea. Did you ever notice that brooch? She wore it so proudly." Langley's smile was a fraction too tight. "A brooch? I can't say I did, Miss Marple. I'm not one for noticing jewelry." His voice held a forced lightness, but a bead of sweat glistened at his temple. "Oh, but you must have seen it," Miss Marple pressed, her tone innocent. "It was right there, pinned to her shawl, the day she spoke of her husband's old business ventures. Such a pity it's gone missing along, with that curious phial the gardener found. Do you garden, Mr. Langley?" The room stilled. Langley's face paled, his eyes darting to the door. I don't see what this has to do with anything," he stammered, setting down his cup with a clatter. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene. "Only that secrets, like flowers, have a way of blooming at the wrong moment, don't they?" The vicar's wife gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sir Henry, standing near the back, gave Miss Marple a subtle nod. The trap was set, and Langley's facade was cracking. One more push, Miss Marple thought, and the truth would spill like tea from a broken pot. Chapter 13. The trap is set. The sun hung low over Harrow Manor, painting the gardens in hues of amber and rose as the day slid toward evening. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking softly, the hidden ledger still secure in her bag. The revelation of the fake diamond in the East Wing's vault had shifted the mystery's landscape, confirming a decades-old deception rooted in the Harrow family's scandal. Sylvia Dunworth's tearful confession, Clarence Vale's cracked facade at the fete, Gideon Frost's threatening demeanor, and the possibility of Grayson's complicity had brought Miss Marple tantalizingly close to the truth. Now she needed to draw the culprits into the open, and she had a plan to do just that. The idea had taken shape during the quiet hours after Sylvia's revelation. The fake diamond suggested that Clarence and Frost were chasing a myth, unaware of the substitution, but their persistence hinted at a belief that the real diamond was still within reach. Miss Marple suspected they were working together or against each other, driven by greed or desperation. To expose them, she needed to create a moment of pressure, a stage where their motives would betray them. A fake auction of the recovered diamond, orchestrated with Beatrice's help, would be the perfect trap. She approached Beatrice after lunch, finding her in the conservatory, tending to a wilting orchid with a distracted air. "Beatrice, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but purposeful, "I've been thinking about the diamond. All this trouble, the choker, the broken window, Mr. Frost's poking about, it's unsettling the house. Perhaps a bold move might flush out the truth." Beatrice's eyes sharpened, her fingers pausing on the orchid's leaves. "A bold move, Jane? What do you have in mind?" Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice low. "Announce that the diamond's been found recovered from the vault, let's say, and that you plan to auction it for charity at a small gathering tomorrow night. Invite the key players: Clarence, Frost, Sylvia, Edmund. The prospect of the diamond in play might push someone to act rashly." Beatrice's lips parted, a mix of admiration and apprehension in her gaze. "You're a sly one, Jane, but it's risky. If the diamond's a fake, as you suspect, what then?" "Then we'll see who knows it's a fake and who doesn't," Miss Marple said, her smile serene. "And we'll have the police nearby, just in case. I've a friend in the local constabulary, Inspector Craddock. He's discreet and can be trusted." Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. I'll make the announcement at dinner. But, Jane, be careful. I don't trust Frost, and Clarence, he's not what he seems." Miss Marple patted her hand, her eyes bright. "I'm always careful, my dear, and I've a feeling the truth is about to come to light." Dinner was a tense affair, the guests' chatter overshadowed by Beatrice's announcement. "My friends," she said, her voice ringing clear as she stood, her cane a regal prop, "I have good news. The Harrow diamond has been recovered from its vault, safe and sound. To put an end to this tiresome business, I've decided to auction it for charity. Tomorrow night, here in the Grand Hall, a select group is invited: Mr. Vale, Mr. Frost, Miss Dunworth, Mr. Harrow, and a few others. I trust this will lay the rumors to rest." The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken reactions. Clarence's fork froze mid-air, his smile strained, while Frost's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on his satchel. Sylvia paled, her gaze flicking to Miss Marple, who offered a reassuring nod. Edmund's face darkened, his fingers clenching his napkin, but he said nothing. Miss Pym, seated at the far end, dropped her spoon, her spectacles glinting nervously. Miss Marple watched them all, her expression benign, but her mind sharp. The trap was set, and the reactions confirmed her suspicions. Clarence and Frost were the most invested, their motives tied to the diamond's allure, while Sylvia and Edmund were caught in its emotional web. Grayson, serving the meal with his usual precision, avoided her eyes, his silence a clue in itself. The next day passed in a flurry of preparations, with Beatrice orchestrating the auction's details, and Miss Marple quietly coordinating with Inspector Craddock. He arrived discreetly, posing as a guest, his plainclothes blending with the Manor's staff. Miss Marple briefed him on the fake diamond, the vault, and the suspects, her voice calm but firm. "Watch Clarence and Frost, Inspector," she said. "They're the ones to move, I'm sure of it." The auction was held in the Grand Hall. The chandeliers dimmed to focus attention on a velvet-draped table where the fake diamond sparkled. Under a single spotlight, the guests, Clarence, Frost, Sylvia, Edmund, Miss Pym, and a handful of local dignitaries sat in a semicircle, their faces tense. Beatrice stood at the podium, her poise unshaken, while Miss Marple took a seat near the back, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes scanning the room. As Beatrice began the bidding, describing the diamond's storied history, Miss Marple noted Clarence's restless fidgeting and Frost's rigid posture. Sylvia sat quietly, her hands clasped, while Edmund's scowl deepened with each bid. The room's tension was palpable, the air heavy with anticipation. Then, as the bidding reached a fever pitch, a sudden movement broke the spell. Clarence stood, his face flushed, and lunged toward the table, snatching the diamond. "It's mine!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "I've waited too long for this." Before he could flee, Frost was on him, grabbing his arm. "You idiot," Frost hissed. "It's not worth it." The two struggled, the diamond falling to the floor with a dull thud, revealing its glass-like sheen under the light. "Inspector." Craddock and his men moved swiftly, restraining both men as the room erupted in gasps. Miss Marple rose, her voice calm but commanding. "Inspector, I believe Mr. Vale and Mr. Frost have some explaining to do." In the chaos that followed, Frost broke, his composure crumbling under Craddock's questioning. "I'm no investigator," he confessed, his voice bitter. "Vale hired me to find the diamond. He thought it was real, said it'd make us rich. I knew it was a fake found out from the ledger I took, but I played along, thinking I could double-cross him. Clarence, pale and defeated, slumped in his chair. I needed the money, he muttered. The diamond was my way out. I thought Frost was helping me, but he was just using me. Sylvia, tears in her eyes, turned to Beatrice. You knew it was fake, didn't you? All this time. Beatrice nodded, her face weary. My father replaced it years ago to protect the family from its curse. I kept the secret to avoid more scandal. Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction as the police led Clarence and Frost away. The trap had worked, exposing their greed and deception. Sylvia's relief, Edmund's stunned silence, and Beatrice's confession tied up the loose ends, though the real diamond's fate remained a mystery. For now the manor was at peace, and Miss Marple was content, knowing justice had been served. Chapter 14. A quiet departure. The morning sun bathed Harrow Manor in a gentle glow, softening the edges of its honey-colored stone and casting dappled shadows across the rose gardens. Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room, her knitting bag at her side, a cup of Earl Grey steaming in her hands. The manor was quiet now, the frenetic energy of the past week replaced by a serene calm, as if the house itself had exhaled after. The storm of secrets had passed. The fake auction had exposed Clarence Vale and Gideon Frost as conspirators, their greed for the Harrow diamond, unaware it was a counterfeit laid bare in a moment of chaos. Sylvia Dunworth's relief, Edmund Harrow's stunned silence, and Lady Beatrice Harrow's confession about the diamond's substitution had brought the mystery to a close. Though the real diamond's whereabouts remained a tantalizing enigma, Miss Marple's mind was at ease, her instincts satisfied. The trap she'd orchestrated with Beatrice had worked flawlessly, drawing out the culprits and restoring peace to the manor. Clarence and Frost were in custody, their confessions unraveling a scheme driven by desperation and deceit. Sylvia, freed from the weight of her family's feud, had found a fragile reconciliation with Edmund, who seemed chastened by the revelation that the diamond he'd coveted was a myth. Beatrice, though weary from the ordeal, had regained her poise, her gratitude to Miss Marple unspoken but evident in her warm smiles. The morning room was a haven of light, its tall windows framing the gardens where villagers were dismantling. The Fates' stalls. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the east wing, where the vault and its fake diamond had held the key to the mystery. The ledger, still hidden in her knitting bag, would be returned to Beatrice before she left. It belonged to the Harrows, a record of their tangled past. But for now she savored the quiet, her thoughts turning over the human frailties she'd witnessed, greed, resentment, and the longing for redemption. Beatrice entered, her silver cane tapping lightly, her lilac dress a soft contrast to the room's muted tones. "Jane, you're up early," she said, settling into an armchair with a sigh. "I thought you'd sleep in after all the excitement." "Oh, I find mornings the best time for reflection," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "And I've a train to catch this afternoon. St. Mary Mead has been invigorating, but I'm ready for my own hearth." Beatrice's eyes softened, a hint of mischief in them. "Invigorating, indeed. You've turned my house upside, Jane, and I'm grateful for it. You saw through Clarence and Frost when I couldn't." "Nonsense, my dear," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her knitting. "You suspected them all along." I only gave them a nudge to show their true colors. Beatrice laughed, a sound of genuine warmth. A nudge. You're a master at it, Jane. But tell me, what will you do with that ledger? It's caused enough trouble. I'll leave it with you, Miss Marple said, patting her bag. It's part of your family's story, for better or worse. Though I confess I'm curious about the real diamond. Do you think it's still out there? Beatrice's smile faded, her gaze distant. I don't know, Jane. My father swore it was lost, sold, perhaps to settle debts after the scandal. I chose to believe him. The fake was enough to keep the legend alive without the curse. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. Beatrice's decision to maintain the deception was a practical one, rooted in love for her family's legacy. The real diamond, if it existed, was a mystery for another day, one Miss Marple was content to leave unsolved. Their conversation turned to lighter matters, the village's new vicar, the success of the Fates Jam contest, but Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the Manor's players. Sylvia had found a measure of peace, her quest for the diamond driven by a desire to heal old wounds. Edmund, though humbled, would need time to let go of his resentment. Grayson, the butler, had been cleared of suspicion, his loyalty to Beatrice unwavering despite his knowledge of the vault. Miss Pym, the nervous librarian, had quietly returned to her books, her role in the drama peripheral but poignant dot as noon approached. Beatrice insisted on a final tea in the conservatory, a gesture of farewell that Miss Marple couldn't refuse. The table was set with delicate porcelain and a plate of lavender scones, a nod to their earlier chats with Mrs. Tuttle. Sylvia joined them, her face brighter, her emerald eyes free of the strain that had shadowed them. Edmund, too, made a brief appearance, his manner subdued but polite, a sign of tentative reconciliation. Miss Marple, Sylvia said, her voice soft, I owe you so much. You saw what I couldn't, that the diamond wasn't worth the pain it caused. You were brave, my dear, Miss Marple said, her smile warm. It takes courage to face the truth, especially when it's tangled in family ties. Beatrice raised her teacup in a toast. To truth, Jane, and to your sharp eyes. You've given us back our peace. Miss Marple clanked her cup gently, her heart warmed by their gratitude. As they sipped, Beatrice reached into her pocket and produced a small velvet box. A token, Jane, she said, opening it to reveal a delicate silver brooch shaped like a rose. Something to remember us by. It's lovely, Miss Marple said, pinning it to her cardigan. I'll treasure it, Beatrice, as I will these days in St. Mary Mead. The meal ended, and Miss Marple packed her things, her knitting bag, now lighter without the ledger, which she'd slipped to Juno Beatrice's hands. The Manor's car waited to take her to the station, and as she stood by the front door, Beatrice clasped her hands, her eyes bright. You'll come back, won't? You? Beatrice said. The Manor's too quiet without you. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her smile twinkling. But I suspect you'll manage just fine. The drive to the station was peaceful, the countryside rolling by in a blur of green and gold. At the platform she watched the train approach, her thoughts drifting to the diamond's mystery. Its true fate was unknown, but she felt no need to chase it further. The Manor was at rest, its shadows dispelled, and that was enough. As the train pulled away, Miss Marple gazed out the window, her brooch glinting in the sunlight. The Harrow diamond's curse was a tale of human frailty, greed, betrayal, and the hope of redemption, and she had seen it all before, in different guises. With a quiet satisfaction she settled back, her knitting in her lap, content that justice had been served and the Manor's harmony restored. St. Mary Mead faded into the distance, and Miss Marple closed her eyes, ready for the quiet of home. Chapter 15. The Echo of the Diamond. The late summer sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of the thatched cottages and coaxing the last roses to bloom in Miss Jane Marple's garden. She sat in her parlor, a cozy room, filled with the scent of lavender and the gentle ticking of a mantel clock, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she shaped a pale blue shawl. The silver rose brooch from Lady Beatrice Harrow, pinned to her cardigan, caught the light, a quiet reminder of her recent adventure at Harrow Manor. The mystery of the fake Harrow diamond had been resolved, with Clarence Vale and Gideon Frost exposed as conspirators, their greed for a jewel they believed real undone by a well-placed trap. Yet the true diamond's fate remained elusive, a shadow that lingered in Miss Marple's thoughts as she settled back into the familiar rhythms of her village. Her return had been peaceful, the village's gentle gossip a soothing contrast to the Manor's intrigues. The vicar's wife had prattled about a new choir, the postmistress fretted over delayed letters, and the butcher's boy swore he'd seen a ghost in the churchyard. Miss Marple listened with her usual patience, her sharp eyes noting the undercurrents beneath the chatter. Human nature, she knew, was never truly quiet, even in a place as placid as St. Mary Mead. This morning, however, brought a new ripple to the village's calm. A letter arrived, its envelope crisp and bearing the crest of Harrow Manor. Miss Marple opened it with care, her fingers tracing the familiar looping script of Beatrice Harrow. The letter was brief but urgent. "Jane, I hesitate to trouble you so soon, but a curious matter has arisen. A stranger has come to St. Mary Mead, asking questions about the diamond, not the fake, but the real one. He claims to have proof it was never sold, and I fear he may stir trouble. Could you keep an eye out? I trust your judgment above all." Miss Marple set the letter down, her heart quickening, but her face serene. The real Harrow diamond lost, Beatrice had claimed to settle debts decades ago. Yet the ledger she'd found in the Manor hinted at a more complex truth, and now this stranger's arrival suggested the past was not yet done with St. Mary Mead. She tucked the letter into her knitting bag, resolving to visit the village post office where gossip flowed as freely as the stamps. The post office was a bustling hub, its counter crowded with parcels and villagers exchanging news. Miss Marple greeted the postmistress, Mrs. Cleary, a stout woman with a penchant for knowing everyone's business. "Good morning, Mrs. Cleary," she said, her smile disarming. "I've a letter to send, but I confess I'm curious about any new faces in the village. We don't often get strangers here." Mrs. Cleary's eyes gleamed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, Miss Marple, you've heard, then? There's a man staying at the Blue Boar, Mr. Leonard Quill, he calls himself. Sharp sort, with a city suit and a briefcase full of papers. Been asking about the Harrows of all things. Says he's a historian researching old estates, but I reckon he's after something more." Miss Marple's needles paused in her bag, her mind sharp. A historian? How fascinating. Did he mention the Harrow diamond, by chance? Mrs. Cleary leaned closer, her voice barely audible. Not by name, but he was keen on old family scandals. asked if any Harrows had ties to St. Mary Mead, beyond Lady Beatrice's visits, and he was poking about the churchyard near the old Harrow crypt. Queer, if you ask me. Miss Marple nodded, her smile mild, but her thoughts racing. The churchyard, with its ancient crypt, was an unlikely place for a historian's research unless Mr. Quill believed the diamond was hidden there. She thanked Mrs. Cleary and made her way to the Blue Boar, a quaint inn with ivy-clad walls and a reputation for serving the best ale in the village. The inn's taproom was quiet. Save for a few farmers nursing pints, Mr. Leonard Quill was easy to spot, seated in a corner with a briefcase open before him, his pen scratching across a notebook. He was a wiry man in his 50s, with thinning hair and spectacles that magnified his restless eyes. His suit, though well cut, was slightly rumpled, as if he'd traveled far. Miss Marple approached, her manner that of a curious villager. "Mr. Quill, I presume?" she said, her voice warm. "I'm Miss Marple, a local. I hear you're researching our village's history. We're rather proud of our little corner of England." Quill looked up, his smile polite but guarded. "Miss Marple, a pleasure. Yes, I'm studying the region's estates, particularly the Harrow family. Fascinating lineage, full of complexities." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair opposite him, her knitting bag at her feet. "The Harrows are well known, though their diamond seems to attract more attention than their lineage. You've heard the stories, I'm sure." Quill's pen paused, his eyes narrowing. "Stories, yes. A jewel with a curse, or so they say. I'm more interested in facts, documents, records, anything that might clarify the family's past." "Miss." Marple tilted her head, her smile encouraging. "Records can be elusive, can't they? I visited Harrow Manor recently, you know. Such a grand place, but full of shadows. The diamond's history is particularly tangled, a betrayal between brothers, I believe." Quill's fingers tightened on his pen, a flicker of interest in his gaze. "You're well informed, Miss Marple." "Yes, the betrayal between Lord Cedric, Harrow, and his brother Victor. My research suggests Victor hid something valuable before he left the family, possibly in this very village. I'm hoping to find proof." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. Victor Harrow, Edmund's grandfather, was the brother wronged in the scandal, according to Sylvia. If Quill believed he'd hidden the real diamond in St. Mary Mead, it explained his presence and his interest in the churchyard crypt. She decided to test him further. "The churchyard's an odd place for research," she said, her tone light. "I hear you've been seen there, near the Harrow crypt. Looking for something specific?" Quill's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Just historical context, Miss Marple. Old crypts often hold clues, letters, carvings, anything that might shed light on a family's secrets." "Of course," she said, her eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. "But one must be careful stirring up the past. Secrets have a way of drawing trouble." Quill's gaze held hers for a moment, then he excused himself, claiming a need to review his notes. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind cataloguing his reactions. His interest in the crypt, his knowledge of Victor Harrow, and his evasive manner suggested he was no mere historian. Was he a treasure hunter like Clarence and Frost, or something more dangerous? She decided to visit the churchyard herself, under the pretense of tending her roses near the vicarage. The crypt, a weathered stone structure, half hidden by yew trees, was older than the manor itself, its iron gate rusted but sturdy. Miss Marple examined it discreetly, noting fresh scratches on the lock recent, like those on the manor's safe. Someone had been here, and recently. Quill, perhaps, or another. Player drawn by the diamond's legend. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Miss Pym, the librarian from Harrow Manor, who had returned to St. Mary Mead after the fete. Her spectacles glinted nervously as she approached, clutching a worn book. "Miss Marple, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice trembling. "I was just checking the parish records." "Records again?" Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "You're quite the scholar, Miss Pym. Anything to do with the Harrows, perhaps? I hear Mr. Quill's been asking about them." Miss Pym's cheeks flushed, her fingers tightening on the book. "Mr. Quill? Oh, yes, he came to the library yesterday. Wanted old parish ledgers, one's mentioning Victor Harrow. I told him they're incomplete, but he was insistent." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. Miss Pym's nervousness, so like her behavior at the manor, suggested she'd stumbled onto something, perhaps a clue to the diamond's hiding place. "You've a sharp memory, Miss Pym," she said. "Did Victor Harrow leave anything behind in St. Mary Mead? A letter, perhaps, or a keepsake?" Miss Pym hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There's a story, Miss Marple, in the village archives. Victor Harrow visited St. Mary Mead before he disappeared after the feud with his brother. Some say he left a box in the crypt meant for his son, but it was never found. I didn't tell Mr. Quill, he seemed too eager." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained calm. A box in the crypt, tied to Victor Harrow, could hold the real diamond or proof of its fate. She thanked Miss Pym, urging her to be cautious, and returned home, her mind buzzing with possibilities. That evening she wrote to Beatrice, sharing her findings and suggesting a discreet watch on the crypt. But as night fell, her instincts urged action. Donning a dark shawl, she slipped out to the churchyard, her steps silent on the dew-damp grass. The crypt loomed in the moonlight, its gate ajar, a sign of intrusion. She crept closer, her senses alert, and heard a soft scrape from within. Peering through the gate, she saw Quill, his flashlight illuminating a stone slab. He was prying at it with a crowbar, his movements frantic. Before she could retreat, another figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, her silhouette familiar. Sylvia Dunworth, her face pale but resolute, held a small pistol. "Stop, Mr. Quill," Sylvia said, her voice steady. "You're not taking it." Quill froze, his eyes wide. "Miss Dunworth, I am just researching. There's no need for that." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "I think there's every need, Sylvia. Mr. Quill, perhaps. You'd care to explain what you're looking for?" Quill's shoulders sagged, his flashlight dropping. "It's the diamond," he admitted, his voice bitter. "Victor Harrow's diary found it in a London archive. Said he hid it here in the crypt to keep it from his brother. I thought I could claim it, sell it quietly." Sylvia lowered the pistol, her eyes blazing. "It's not yours to claim. It's my family's, and I won't let it ruin us again." Miss Marple's smile was gentle but piercing. "Nor will I, my dear. Mr. Quill, I suggest you leave this to the authorities. Inspector Craddock will be interested in your research." Quill's confession came in a rush, detailing his plan to sell the diamond on the black market. Sylvia, who had followed him after overhearing his inquiries, had come to protect her family's legacy. Miss Marple called Craddock, who arrived swiftly, taking Quill into custody. The crypt's slab, when opened, revealed a small box containing a single document, a letter from Victor Harrow, confessing he'd sold the diamond to save his family from ruin, leaving the fake to preserve their honor. As dawn broke, Miss Marple sat with Sylvia in the vicarage, sharing tea and reassurance. "You did well, my dear," she said. "The diamond's gone, but your family's peace is worth more." Sylvia nodded, her eyes clear. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I can let it go now." Returning home, Miss Marple pinned her rose brooch to her shawl, her heart light. The echo of the diamond had stirred St. Mary Mead, but her quiet vigilance had silenced it. With a satisfied smile, she resumed her knitting, ready for whatever secrets the village might whisper next. Chapter 16. The hidden air. The autumn breeze whispered through St. Mary Mead, stirring the leaves that dappled Miss Jane Marple's garden with shades of russet and gold. She sat in her parlor, the familiar tick of the mantel clock blending with the soft click of her knitting needles as she shaped a pale blue shawl, now nearly complete. The silver rose brooch from Lady Beatrice Harrow, pinned to her cardigan, gleamed faintly, a memento of her recent triumphs at Harrow Manor and in the village churchyard. The mystery of the fake Harrow diamond had been laid to rest, with Clarence Vale and Gideon Frost exposed as conspirators, and the real diamond's fate revealed through Leonard Quill's ill-fated quest in the crypt. A letter from Victor Harrow, confessing its sale to settle family debts. Yet Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of observing human nature, told her that the diamond's shadow had not entirely lifted from St. Mary Mead. The village had settled back into its gentle rhythms after Quill's arrest, with the vicar's wife fretting over the harvest festival and the postmistress gossiping about a new baker. But Miss Marple's quiet morning was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, a young woman, barely 20, with auburn hair and eyes that held a mix of determination and unease. She stood at Miss Marple's gate, clutching a worn satchel, her tweed coat too large for her slight frame. Miss Marple, ever alert to new threads in the village's tapestry, invited her in, sensing a story waiting to unfold. "Miss Marple, I'm Clara Harrow," the young woman said, her voice soft but steady, as she sat in the parlor, a cup of tea warming her hands. "I'm related to Lady Beatrice Harrow distantly. I've come because of the diamond, the Harrow diamond. I heard what happened, and I think there's more to it." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes bright with interest. "Clara. Harrow, you say? My dear, you've come a long way, I imagine. Tell me, what brings you to St. Mary Mead, and what more could there be about the diamond?" Clara's fingers tightened on her satchel, her gaze flicking to the window as if expecting pursuit. "My grandfather was Victor Harrow, Beatrice's uncle. He left a letter, not the one in the crypt, but another, hidden in our family's cottage in Devon. It said the diamond wasn't sold, not entirely. He entrusted it to someone here in St. Mary Mead to keep it safe until a true heir could claim it. I think I'm that heir." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. Victor Harrow's letter in the crypt had claimed the diamond was sold, but Clara's story suggested a deeper deception, one that had kept the jewel hidden for decades. "A true heir," she mused, her tone gentle. "That's a weighty claim, my dear. Do you know who Victor entrusted it to?" Clara shook her head, her auburn curls catching the light. The letter only mentioned a guardian of the village, someone trusted by the Harrows. I came to find them, but I'm not sure where to start. And there's someone else, a man who's been following me since I left Devon. I saw him at the station yesterday, watching me." Miss Marple's mind raced, cataloging the possibilities. A guardian in St. Mary Mead, a hidden diamond, and a mysterious pursuer. This was a new thread, vibrant and dangerous. She offered Clara a scone, her smile reassuring. "You've done. Well, to come to me, Clara, let's start with this man. Can you describe him?" "Tall, dark hair, a scar on his cheek," Clara said, her voice trembling. "He wore a gray coat and kept his distance, but I felt his eyes on me. I think he knows about the diamond." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the village's recent strangers. Leonard Quill, now in custody, had been alone, but Clara's description suggested another player, perhaps tied to the diamond's enduring allure. She resolved to investigate, starting with the village's oldest residents, who might recall Victor Harrow's time in St. Mary Mead. After Clara left, promising to stay at the Blue Boar and keep a low profile, Miss Marple donned her hat and shawl and made her way to the vicarage, where Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, was a font of village lore. The vicarage was a cheerful chaos of harvest festival preparations, with baskets of apples and pumpkins crowding the hall. Mrs. Price, her apron dusted with flour, greeted Miss Marple with a warm smile. "Jane, you're just in time for a cuppa," Mrs. Price said, ushering her into the kitchen. "Though I'll wager you're not here for tea alone. What's the village buzzing about now?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "You know me too well, Margaret. I'm curious about the Harrow's Victor Harrow in particular. He spent time here years ago, didn't he? Perhaps with a trusted friend?" Mrs. Price's brow furrowed, her hands pausing on a tray of biscuits. "Victor Harrow? Oh, yes, I remember my mother talking about him. Came to St. Mary Mead in the 20s, after a falling out with his brother. Stayed with old Mr. Bantry, the sexton at the time. They were thick as thieves, those two, always whispering in the churchyard. My mother swore Victor left something with Bantry papers, maybe, or a keepsake." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained light. "A keepsake, you say? How curious. Is Mr. Bantry's family still in the village?" "His grandson. Tom Bantry runs the bakery," Mrs. Price said, her eyes gleaming with gossip. "Quiet sort, but he's got his grandfather's old things in a trunk, letters, photos, that sort of thing. You might ask him, Jane, though he's not one for chatter." Miss Marple thanked her and headed to the bakery, a quaint shop fragrant with the scent of fresh bread. Tom Bantry, a stocky man with flour-dusted hands and a reserved manner, was kneading dough behind the counter. She approached with her usual tact, complimenting his scones before steering the conversation to his grandfather. "Mr. Bantry, I'm researching a bit of village history," she said, her smile disarming. "Your grandfather knew Victor Harrow, I believe. Did he ever mention anything about a keepsake perhaps left for safekeeping?" Tom's hand slowed, his eyes narrowing. "Grandfather mentioned Victor now and then, said he was a troubled man. Left a box with him, yes, but it's long gone. I found it as a lad, but it was empty, just some old papers about the Harrow estate. Nothing valuable." Miss Marple nodded, noting the slight flush in his cheeks. An empty box, or so he claimed, but his unease suggested otherwise. She thanked him and left, her mind buzzing. The box, if it had held the diamond, might still be in St. Mary Mead, and Tom Bantry's guarded response hinted at more than he'd admitted. That evening, Miss Marple visited the Blue Boar, where Clara was staying. The inn was lively, with locals, gathered for darts and ale, but Clara sat alone in a corner, her satchel clutched tightly. She looked up as Miss Marple approached, her face pale. "He was here," Clara whispered, her eyes darting to the door. "The man with the scar. He didn't come in, but I saw him outside, watching." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice was calm. "Stay here, my dear, and don't wander alone. I'll speak to Inspector Craddock. He'll keep an eye out. In the meantime, tell me about this letter from your grandfather. What exactly did it say?" Clara hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her satchel. It was brittle, its ink faded but legible, written in Victor Harrow's precise hand. "To my heir," it read, "the diamond is not lost, but hidden, entrusted to the guardian of St. Mary Mead's heart. Seek the place where faith and stone meet, and claim what is yours. Forgive my secrecy, it was for our family's honor." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "Faith and stone," she murmured. "The church, perhaps, or the crypt again." Victor was clever, hiding his meaning. "We'll need to look closer, but carefully." The next day, Miss Marple returned to the churchyard, her steps light but purposeful. The Harrow crypt, still bearing the scratches from Quill's attempt, was locked, but she examined the surrounding stones, her fingers tracing the weathered inscriptions. One, half hidden by moss, caught her eye, a small marker dedicated to E. Bantry, sexton and keeper of faith, 1925. The date aligned with Victor's visit, and the phrase, keeper of faith, echoed the letter's words. She sought out Tom Bantry again, this time at his cottage, where she found him sorting through a trunk of his grandfather's belongings. "Mr. Bantry," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "I believe your grandfather was Victor Harrow's guardian. The diamond was entrusted to him, wasn't it? Hidden where faith and stone meet." Tom's face paled, his hands trembling. "I didn't know, Miss Marple, I swear. Grandfather told me the box was empty, but I found a stone, once a glittering thing, tucked in a hollowed-out book. I thought it was glass, so I left it in the crypt, behind his marker. Didn't want trouble." Miss Marple's heart raced, but she kept her composure. "You did right to tell me, Tom. Let's fetch it now, with Inspector Craddock's help. No trouble will come to you." That night, under Craddock's watchful eye, they opened the marker's hidden compartment, revealing a small velvet pouch. Inside was the Harrow diamond, its facets catching the moonlight with a fire that belied its cursed reputation. Clara gasped, her eyes wide, but Miss Marple's gaze was on the shadows, where a figure lurked, the man with the scar, revealed as a private investigator hired by a rival Harrow cousin. Hoping to claim the diamond for himself, Craddock apprehended him swiftly, and Clara, clutching the diamond, turned to Miss Marple. "What now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's brought nothing but pain." "Give it to Beatrice," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "Let her decide its fate. You're the heir, Clara, but you're free to choose peace over legacy." Clara nodded, her resolve firm. The diamond was sent to Beatrice, who later wrote to say it would be donated to a museum, its curse finally broken. Miss Marple returned to her parlor, her shawl complete, her brooch gleaming. The hidden heir had been found, the diamond reclaimed, and St. Mary Mead was quiet once more. With a satisfied smile, she resumed her knitting, ready for the next whisper of secrets the village might bring. Chapter 17. The Whisper of the Will. The first whispers of autumn had settled over St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a crisp chill that turned the leaves to amber and crimson. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, the familiar tick of the mantel, clock blending with the soft click of her knitting needles as she finished a pale blue shawl, its delicate stitches a testament to her patient hands. The silver rose brooch from Lady Beatrice Harrow, pinned to her cardigan, caught the morning light, a quiet reminder of her recent triumphs. The Harrow diamonds saga had unfolded in layers, first at the Manor, where Clarence Vale and Gideon Frost's greed was exposed, then in St. Mary Mead, where Clara Harrow, Victor's granddaughter, uncovered the real diamond hidden in the churchyard crypt. Its donation to a museum, at Clara's urging, had seemed to close the book on the Harrow family's cursed legacy. But Miss Marple knew that secrets, like stubborn weeds, had a way of resurfacing. The village had returned to its gentle rhythm, with the harvest festival behind them and the vicarage bustling with plans for a Christmas pageant. Yet a new ripple disturbed the calm, arriving in the form of a letter from Clara Harrow, postmarked from London, where she'd gone to settle her grandfather's estate. The letter was brief but urgent, its words tinged with unease. Miss Marple, I've found something troubling a will hidden in Victor's papers, naming a beneficiary for the diamond's proceeds, someone in St. Mary Mead. I'm coming back to investigate, but I'm being watched again. Please help. Miss Marple sat, the letter down, her heart quickening, but her face serene. A hidden wheel, tied to the diamond sale decades ago, suggested that Victor Harrow's final act was more complex than his crypt letter had implied. A mention of a beneficiary in St. Mary Mead was intriguing, and Clara's fear of being watched echoed her earlier encounter with the scarred investigator. Miss Marple tucked the letter into her knitting bag, resolving to meet Clara upon her arrival and probe the village's older residents, who might recall Victor's connections beyond the late sexton, Mr. Bantry. The Blue Boar was quiet when Clara arrived that afternoon, her auburn hair tucked under a scarf, her eyes darting nervously as she clutched a leather portfolio. Miss Marple greeted her with a warm smile, guiding her to a corner table away from the inn's few patrons. "My dear Clara," she said, pouring tea, "you've had quite a journey. Tell me about this will and who's been watching you." Clara's fingers trembled as she opened the portfolio, revealing a yellowed document, its edges frayed, but its ink clear. "It's Victor's last will, dated 1925, she said, her voice low. "Found it in a locked box in Devon, with a note saying, 'It was never filed.' It names a beneficiary for the diamond sale, Miss Eleanor Finch, of St. Mary Mead. Victor wrote that she was to receive the proceeds to secure her future, but there's no record of the money ever reaching her." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, her mind racing. Eleanor Finch was a name from the village's past, a school teacher who had died in the 1940s, known for her quiet kindness and a mysterious sadness that lingered in local lore. Eleanor Finch, she mused, her tone gentle. "I remember her a gentle soul, lived near the church. Did Victor say why she was chosen?" Clara shook her head, her curls catching the light. "Only that she was dear to the family's heart. But there's more, Miss Marple. In London I was followed again, not the scarred man from before, but a woman, middle-aged, with dark hair and a sharp face. She was at the archive where I found the will asking about Victor's papers. I think she knows about the beneficiary." Miss Marple's needles, resting in her lap, stilled. A new pursuer, and a woman this time, suggested a broader conspiracy, perhaps tied to the diamond's proceeds rather than the jewel itself. "You've done well to come here, Clara," she said, her smile reassuring. "We'll find this Miss Finch's connection, and we'll keep you safe. Have you told anyone else?" "No one," Clara said, her voice firm. "Not even Beatrice. I didn't want to stir more trouble until I knew the truth." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the village's archives, where parish records might reveal Eleanor Finch's ties to Victor Harrow. She suggested Clara stay at the Blue Boar, under the innkeeper's watchful eye, and promised to consult Inspector Craddock for protection. After seeing Clara settled, she made her way to the church, where the parish clerk, Mr. Wetherby, kept meticulous records in a cramped office behind the Vestry. Mr. Wetherby, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, greeted her with a nod, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "Miss Marple, always a pleasure. Here for the pageant schedule, or something more historical?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "History, Mr. Wetherby. I'm curious about Eleanor Finch, the old school teacher. She lived here in the 20s, I believe. Any records of her connection to the Harrow family?" Wetherby's brow furrowed as he pulled a ledger from a dusty shelf. "Eleanor Finch, yes. Lovely woman, taught my mother to read. Let's see." He flipped through the pages, his fingers tracing entries. "Here 1924, a donation to the church in her name, from Victor Harrow. Odd, that. And a note about her tending the Harrow crypt, as a favor to the family. No mention of why." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained light. "Tending the crypt? How kind of her. Any family still in the village?" "Her niece, Agnes Finch, runs the haberdashery," Wetherby said. "Bit of a recluse, but she might know something. Lives above the shop, keeps to herself." Miss Marple thanked him and headed to the haberdashery, a quaint store lined with bolts of fabric and jars of buttons. Agnes Finch was a stern woman in her 60s, her dark hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She greeted Miss Marple with a curt nod, her hands busy sorting ribbons. "Miss Finch, I'm Jane Marple," she said, admiring a spool of lace. "I'm looking into some village history about your Aunt Eleanor. She was close to the Harrow family, wasn't she?" Agnes's hands stilled, her gaze narrowing. "Aunt Eleanor?" "She never spoke of the Harrows, except to say they were kind to her. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming, but her eyes were keen. "A document's come to light a will, mentioning Eleanor as a beneficiary. It's tied to the Harrow diamond, you see." Hans's face tightened, her fingers clutching the ribbon. "The diamond? That old purse?" "Aunt Eleanor wanted nothing to do with it. She said Victor Harrow made promises he couldn't keep, left her with nothing but regrets. If there's a will, it's news to me." Miss Marple noted the bitterness. In Amy's voice, a clue to a deeper grievance. She thanked her and left, her mind buzzing. Eleanor Finch had been more than a friend to Victor, perhaps a confidant, or even a love he couldn't claim. The will's promise of the diamond's proceeds, never fulfilled, suggested a betrayal, intentional or not. and as his reaction hinted at a family wound, one that might draw the mysterious woman Clara had seen. That evening Miss Marple met Clara at the Blue Boar, where Inspector Craddock joined them, his plain clothes blending with the inn's patrons. Clara described the woman again: dark hair, sharp features, a city accent, and Craddock promised to patrol the village, looking for strangers. Miss Marple shared her findings, suggesting they search Eleanor Finch's old cottage, now rented to a young couple, for any hidden clues. The cottage, a stone's throw from the church, was tidy but modest, its garden overgrown with late roses. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Tate, welcomed Miss Marple and Clara, curious but cooperative. Miss Finch's things were cleared out years ago, Mrs. Tate said, her apron dusted with flour. But there's a loose floorboard in the attic. Found it when we moved in. Never looked inside. With Craddock's help, they pried up the board, revealing a small tin box, rusted but intact. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon from Victor Harrow to Eleanor Finch. The letters spoke of love, forbidden by family duty, and a promise to secure her future with the diamond's sale. The final letter, dated 1925, revealed Victor's plan to hide the proceeds in a London bank under a false name until Eleanor could claim it. A key, small and ornate, was tucked among the letters, its purpose unclear. Miss Marple's heart raced, but her voice was calm. This key may lead to the money, Clara. Victor meant to provide for Eleanor, but something stopped him, perhaps his sudden departure. Clara's eyes widened, but before she could speak, a shadow moved outside the cottage window, a woman, her dark hair catching the moonlight. Craddock sprang to action, chasing her into the garden, but she vanished into the night. She's quick, he muttered, returning, but I'll find her. Miss Marple examined the key, her mind racing. The woman, likely tied to Agnes Finch or another Harrow rival, was after the same prize, the diamond's proceeds, hidden for decades. She suggested Clara stay with her for safety, and the next day they visited the bank in London, using Victor's letters to trace the account. The key opened a safe deposit box containing bonds worth a small fortune, untouched since 1925. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple confronted Agnes Finch, who admitted the woman was her cousin, hired to retrieve. The money she believed was stolen from Eleanor. Aunt Eleanor deserved better, Agnes said, her voice breaking. She loved Victor, and he left her with nothing. Miss Marple's smile was gentle but firm. He tried, my dear. The money's yours now, as Eleanor's heir. Let it heal, not harm. With Craddock's help, the cousin was apprehended, her scheme undone. Clara, relieved, gave the bonds to Agnes, honoring Victor's intent. Miss Marple returned to her parlor, her shawl complete, her brooch gleaming. The whisper of the will had stirred the village, but her quiet vigilance had restored its peace. With a satisfied smile, she resumed her knitting, ready for the next secret St. Mary Mead might reveal.